Under the glow of a brilliant crescent moon, a quiet and serene night falls over the grand estate. She stands before the massive wooden doors of the grand hall, gently knocking in the quiet of the night. Clutching her necklace, she looks down, her eyes filled with a deep, unspoken sorrow. Hasn't he returned yet? Does he not want to come? Maybe it's for the best. If I were to face that handsome visage, press our skin together, and share his warmth, I might fall for the delusion that he loves me, just like my past self did. Spending just a single night with him is enough. The day Asiel was conceived. She stands at her desk, staring down at a blank sheet of paper, preparing to write down her thoughts. She hesitates for a brief moment, her fingers pausing as she prepares to write. She remembers the precious warmth of her baby's tiny hand holding onto her finger. My baby! A sudden resolve shines through her tears, her brilliant blue eyes filled with determination. She sits at her desk, writing a letter as the quill scratches softly against the paper. Lost in her thoughts, she remains completely unaware of the tall figure that has quietly stepped behind her. I thought you would be asleep. What are you so surprised about? On our wedding night, I didn't think you would come. Even though you stayed up waiting for me all this time, it wouldn't be polite for me to be asleep when you arrived. He gently reaches out, his fingers tilting her face up as she looks at him with wide, startled eyes. His hand firmly yet gently cups her chin, drawing her gaze entirely to him. Can't let myself be mistaken. This is not love. They say men can sleep with partners they don't even care about. I loved the warmth of his firm embrace. I once believed that was love, and I instantly fell for him. But I won't be fooled by that warmth anymore. I'm only spending the night with him so I can meet my child. Ready when you are. Paste the text and I'll read it instantly. A vision of her sweet, dark-haired baby smiling warmly and reaching his tiny arms out to her fills her heart with joy. Entwined in each other's arms on the bed, they share a passionate and intimate embrace. He sits up in bed, his gaze lingering on her as the moonlight illuminates his muscular chest. This was about 2 years before the regression. Outside the mansion, soldiers and servants gather around the carriage in the falling snow, preparing for departure. Herden, why have you come here, my lady? Especially, she gently rests her gloved hand against her heavily pregnant belly, holding her breath. When you are so far along, it's been over half a year since I last saw you. It would have been nice if you had stopped by the estate. She looks up at him anxiously, a bead of sweat running down her cheek as she waits for his response. Herden, just for an hour. No, couldn't you spare just 30 minutes for me? How strange. I definitely had so much to say. When will you return to the capital next? I'm not sure. I can't make any promises. Did you receive the letters I sent you? You never replied once, so... The kicking is so strong that it's hard to sleep at night. She cradles her stomach gently to hide her discomfort while he sits opposite her, watching silently. No, I'm fine. The carriage travels through the heavy snowfall as the grand castle recedes into the distance. Well then, have a safe delivery. He turns his back and walks away toward the carriage, leaving her standing alone in the cold snow. He casts one last look back, his striking blue eyes cold and unreadable. If a girl is born, Diana. And if a boy is born, how about Asiel? No, I'll go. Blair cradles her pregnant stomach with a sad smile, while Herden casts a cold, distant look in her direction. He turns around without hesitation, leaving his pregnant wife standing in the freezing snow. Duke Herden Dalmark, the continent's only magic swordsman, blessed with the power of the divine beast, a war hero. He was celebrated as a legendary war hero who brought victory to his nation. And me, Blair Dalmark, princess of the Ardell imperial family and the current Duchess of Dalmark. Right around the time I became pregnant, Herden left for the main castle of the Dalmark Duchy. On the surface, it was to subjugate demonic beasts. But I knew it was merely an excuse to avoid me. Their marriage was nothing more than a political union, devoid of any real affection. After all, the Dalmark Duchy and the imperial family are bound by bad blood. Therefore, pardon. I wanted you to stay by my side. It's scary being all alone. However, Herden, she spent her lonely pregnancy holding on to the hope of her child's birth. But instead of returning to his family, Herden was seen in the company of another woman. Madam, madam! His Excellency will be arriving soon. Hearing that her husband has finally returned, Blair's heart flutters with anticipation. Asiel, your father is home. Shall we go greet him together? Abu? Little Asiel smiles brightly, blissfully unaware of the cold reality that awaits them. This is the first time you'll see your father since you were in my tummy, isn't it? I'm excited too. It has been half a year since Herden left for the north, but he didn't even return for the moment Asiel was born. It must be because he still resents me. How many nights have I, too, spent awake in tears? But he can't hate me forever. She held on to the hope that their child could be the red thread that binds their broken hearts together. I want to build a proper family, even if we're starting late, if only for the sake of our lovely child. Your father will surely understand when he sees how much you look like him. She eagerly makes her way down to greet her long-awaited husband. Who is that? He returns after 1 year with another woman? They rode in the same carriage. Could it be Miela Elias? As a priestess, she went to the north on a pilgrimage by the goddess's will and happened to find our knights under attack by demonic beasts and aided them. I thought highly of her skills and hired her to assist in subjugating the demonic beasts. A brilliant talent and a lord who recognized her. She will continue to serve me with utmost trust and assist me. On the surface, that was the extent of their relationship, but the servants whispered about the two of them. I heard she'll be staying at the mansion for a while. Don't you think there's something going on between His Excellency and Lady Miela? The maids whisper in hushed tones, spreading rumors of an illicit romance between the Duke and the priestess. Just look at how often they're together. It's only a matter of time before His Excellency falls for her too. True, whatever happens, she has to be better than the enemy's daughter. I didn't show any reaction to the rumors. Doing so would only mean admitting they were true. The suffocating summer passed, followed by autumn, and the bleak winter returned. He never sought me out first. Even when I occasionally went to see him, he refused to meet me, so I too stopped trying to mend our relationship. If there was one relief, it was that he occasionally showed interest in Asiel. Despite his coldness toward Blair, Hardin would sometimes cast a lingering glance at his young son. Since Asiel's birthday is in 15 days, he might agree to a request like this. Desperate to give her son a proper family, she gathers her courage to make a request for his upcoming birthday. Holding her breath, she stands before his study, hoping for a warm reception. The office door is open. Her eye widens in absolute shock as she catches sight of a couple embracing intimately by the window. A close-up reveals his striking blue eye, filled with an intense, unreadable emotion. Blair stands frozen behind the doorframe, her eyes wide with shock and heartbreak as she witnesses the intimate embrace. He holds her tightly, burying his face in her long silver hair as if she is the only one who matters to him. It feels like a dream, she whispers, leaning gently against his chest in complete contentment. I love you, she says. Blair turns and runs away from the scene as fast as she can, her heart completely shattered. My lady, His Excellency says his schedule has been delayed. On Asiel's birthday, the servants gather around Blair and her baby, clapping and celebrating in the grand decorated hall. Surrounded and congratulated by the servants, eating delicious food, and receiving plenty of birthday gifts sent by the retainers. Little Asiel smiles brightly, blissfully happy as he plays with the festive golden ribbons from his gifts, except for the fact that his father wasn't there. She cradles her precious child close, kissing him gently as the snow falls outside the window. My little one, you were so beautiful today. Oh, so adorable. The sweet baby lets out a tiny yawn, ready to fall asleep after a long day of celebrations. Abu? Baby Asiel coos, looking up at his mother with his bright blue eyes. Blair gazes down at her son, her expression filled with a deep, quiet melancholy. Did you know I've been waiting for your father all day? She asks softly. She gently caresses his cheek, and his sweet laughter brings a small, tender smile to her face. Despite her efforts to stay strong, a single tear wells up in her eye and silently spills over. She stands quietly by the door, surrounded by the cold and silent atmosphere of the room. Cast in deep shadow, she struggles to bear the weight of her loneliness and sorrow. Tears stream down her face in the darkness, her heartbreak finally breaking through her composed facade. He's at an age where even receiving all of his parents' love wouldn't be enough. She sobs, burying her face in her hands. Her chest tightens with grief as she weeps, devastated by the unfair reality her innocent child must face. If I could go back in time, I wouldn't love him. Suddenly, she gasps in shock as heavy footsteps echo nearby. A dark, cloaked figure steps into the room, a sharp dagger gleaming menacingly in his hand as Blair looks up in horror. No, Hardin! She desperately runs, hoping her husband will come to her rescue. Panic sets in as she gasps for breath, her heart pounding wildly against her chest. You can't. You'll wake Asiel in the next room. Blair reaches out in absolute desperation, pleading for her child's safety. He can't find out about Asiel, not him. The assassin's red eyes gleam in the dark above the sleeping baby. Help me, she screams inside, desperately grabbing the bell rope to sound the alarm. Someone, please, protect my baby. In the servants' quarters, the communication bells begin to ring out in the quiet night. A maid turns around in surprise, noticing one of the bells on the wall shaking frantically. This late at night? Is she having trouble sleeping? Wait, That bell, it sounds frantic. The maids gasp in horror as the rope is pulled with desperate, violent strength from the other side. Blair lies collapsed on the floor, a dagger plunged deep into her back, yet she uses her remaining strength to hold onto the rope. Ugh, she gasps, the excruciating pain of the wound overwhelming her. My lady! My lady! Are you all right? My lady! The assassin glances back coldly as the footsteps of the servants draw near. With a swift movement, the assassin flees into the night, leaving Blair bleeding out on her bed. Her vision begins to blur, and her breathing grows shallower with every passing second. Thank God, I'm so glad I didn't let Asiel sleep in my room today.
No, I can't die like this. My baby! She gasps, gritting her teeth against the creeping darkness.
Safe in his room, little Asiel sleeps peacefully, completely unaware of the tragedy unfolding nearby. My lady! The servants cry out as they burst into the room. Blair's fading thoughts linger on her son. There's still so much I wanted to do for him. A final tear slips from her eye as she prepares to draw her last, painful breath. Suddenly, a brilliant, magical clock appears in a swirl of light, shattering as time itself begins to warp and reverse. With a violent gasp, Blair opens her eyes wide, waking up to find herself back in the past. Blair gasps violently as she wakes up, clutching her chest in sheer terror as the memory of her death still feels incredibly real. What happened? Wasn't I dead? She wonders, staring down at her trembling hands that are completely clean, devoid of any blood from her fatal wound. She sits alone in the middle of her grand sunlit bed, hiding her tear-stained face in her hands as she struggles to make sense of her surroundings. Your Highness? Are you awake? Lena asks warmly as she opens the door to greet her lady. Panic-stricken, Blair immediately asks her maid, Lena, where's Asiel? Lena tilts her head in confusion. Huh? Asiel? She repeats, prompting Blair to desperately cry out, Yes, Asiel, is he okay? Is he safe? Lena looks completely bewildered, utterly confused by her mistress's frantic questions about a child. Blair grips her nightgown tightly, trying to steady her erratic breathing as she looks at Lena's clueless expression. Her eyes widen in sudden realization as a shocking thought crosses her mind. This place, she whispers, looking around the familiar, opulent bedroom of her youth. She stares blankly at the maid standing before her, slowly realizing that something is profoundly different about her current reality. My lady, Lena calls out frantically. Blair wonders, why is Lena calling me your highness instead of duchess? Lena looks astonished. A son, she says? Where on earth would your highness have a son? You aren't even married yet, she says, her words striking Blair like a bolt of lightning. Lena stands in front of Blair with a look of sheer disbelief, holding a clean white sheet in her hands. Outside, the imperial palace stands grand and majestic under the golden sunlight, while inside, the royal family gathers for an elegant, quiet banquet. As she sits at the dining table with her family, Blair realizes she has traveled back to a time before she ever married Herden. Or am I reliving the past in my final moments, she questions, her painful memories of Herden and her wedding shattering like broken glass. Suddenly, a stern voice cuts through her thoughts, calling out, Blair, Blair!
She flinches, her eyes widening in surprise as she is abruptly brought back to reality.
Lena leans in close, whispering with a worried and tense expression on her face. You've been spacing out this whole time, says Katrina Ardell, the haughty Empress Dowager of the Ardell imperial family, casting a cold glare at her daughter. Sitting at the head of the table is Ivan Ardell, the formidable and cold emperor of the Ardell imperial family. The tense silence of the dining hall is filled only by the sharp, metallic scraping of a knife slicing through meat. It's nothing much, just your marriage to Duke Delmark, Ivan states coldly as he takes a bite of food. Make sure you're prepared so there are no issues. Blair looks up in utter shock, her breath hitching as she hears the command. Ivan wipes his mouth elegantly and adds dismissively, the discussion is already over. Ivan reminds her of her duty, saying, You are a princess of this empire. Their voices echo around her, telling her that Duke Delmark is the most eligible bachelor in the empire and that this marriage is a grand honor for their family's relations. Summoning all her courage, Blair looks them in the eye and declares, I'm sorry, but I refuse to go through with this marriage. It was the very first time in her life that she had ever stood up to her family. Seeing their furious expressions, Blair quickly realizes she must change her approach. With a calm, resolute gaze, she says, It is the Emperor's will, so I shall obey. Back in her room, she lies awake, or if I'm dreaming because I died, but no matter how much I replay it, she muses. This isn't a dream, she realizes, her eyes shining with absolute clarity in the dark room. She fondly remembers the blissful moments of holding her beautiful baby boy, Asiel, and watching his bright smile. The memory of her precious child's soft touch and warm embrace fills her heart with a bittersweet longing, which only makes this moment feel even more hollow, she thinks, staring into the quiet darkness of her room. She looks down at the magic crystal necklace resting on her chest, realizing it is the key to her regression. Even if it's true that I miraculously returned to the past, she thinks as she holds the memory of her son close to her heart. She remembers the cold, loveless wedding with Herden, a man who never looked at her with warmth. I will do anything if it means meeting Asiel again, she vows, staring at the empty space where his crib once stood. Even if it means repeating a married life that was dreadfully lonely, she resolves, her gaze filled with determination. Blair instructs her maid, send a messenger to the Delmark Duchy. Tell them, Lena gasps in disbelief. You mean you intend to… she stammers. Blair looks back with unwavering resolve, ready to change the course of her future. Lena quietly closes the bedroom door, her mind racing with anxiety over her mistress's sudden, bold command. I can't help but be shocked, Lena thinks, and for good reason, since only a few months ago, Blair had desperately avoided the Duke at the imperial banquet. Word quickly spreads as Lena delivers the message. The princess sent a message to the Delmark Duchy. Her Highness's father, that is, the late emperor, had 2 women, revealing the complicated royal bloodlines. A grand painted portrait depicts the late emperor standing proudly between his 2 beautiful wives, symbolizing the bad blood and political rivalries of the past. The legal wife and empress, Esmeralda, and the imperial concubine, Katrina. The empress had no children for several years. For that reason, Katrina was brought in as a concubine. Katrina looks downcast and anxious, her long silver hair flowing as she nervously grips her gown while stepping forward. But as soon as she gave birth to a son, Ivan, people looking to cling to power quickly emerged. Thus, the power struggle between Esmeralda and Katrina began to intensify, and it soon escalated into a full-scale political confrontation. A young, blonde-haired girl with a large white bow in her hair stands with her back turned, looking on in silence. Your Imperial Majesty, calls out a voice, causing Empress Esmeralda to turn her head with a startled and solemn look. Nevertheless, she thinks as a pair of small, delicate hands gently reach out to hold her hand adorned with pearls. It is said that Empress Esmeralda cherished Blair, the daughter of her political rival, until that incident occurred, the Empress's palace fire incident. A fire broke out in the Empress's palace. It was an incident where the Empress died and the princess, who was with her, was severely injured. It is said that due to the shock, Her Highness lost her memories of that time. The Emperor investigated the truth of who had harmed his daughter, and as a result, all evidence pointed toward the deceased Empress, Esmeralda. The Delmark Duchy, Esmeralda's birth family, denied the results, but in the end, the Empress was buried as a traitor. A butler bows respectfully in the background while the Duke stands silently in the foreground, his expression cold and unreadable. Her Highness, Lena says, looking down with a deeply troubled and worried expression on her face. But somehow, Lena thinks as she walks down the quiet, sunlit hallway, her mind filled with apprehension. Blair stands by the balcony, looking out with a sorrowful and weary gaze, clutching a tiny black toy in her hand. His Majesty the Emperor is truly shameless, a voice murmurs behind the closed doors of the carriage. He's celebrated while the Delmark family's fortunes were failing, grumbles Ruth as he holds a wooden travel chest tightly in his lap. Your Grace, are you not even angry? It is obvious he intends to absorb your influence, now that you have achieved victory in the war and are being revered. Ruth, Duke Delmark says quietly, his single word immediately cutting off his aide, who flinches in surprise. Outside, a grand white carriage drawn by horses waits patiently before the towering, majestic imperial palace. Inside the quiet carriage, Ruth sits opposite the silent Duke, anxiously clutching his chest and looking down in tension. The princess is the only one coming out on top, Ruth sighs, adjusting his glasses as he looks out at the passing scenery. Dressed in an exquisite white gown and a veiled hat, Blair walks gracefully down the marble corridor of the palace, followed closely by Lena. You mean you are going to meet Duke Delmark? Lena asks in surprise, as Blair reflects, come to think of it, it's only natural for Lena to be surprised. A beautiful, lush bouquet of soft yellow and white roses lies ready, representing the elegant meeting to come. The large double doors are open to reveal Duke Delmark standing tall and composed in the bright, elegant drawing room. I shouldn't leave even the slightest possibility that he won't become my husband, Blair resolves, before speaking aloud. Thank you for making time despite your busy schedule, Duke Delmark. I greet Her Imperial Highness, Duke Delmark says, bowing with absolute elegance and respect. Duke Delmark raises Blair's hand to gently kiss it, while she gazes down at him through her thin veil, her blue eyes filled with heavy thoughts. With a smooth and deliberate motion, the Duke releases her gloved hand as a tense silence falls over the room. 1 year, Duke Delmark states coldly, his piercing blue eyes locked onto her.
After a year, I will divorce you and take all the blame, Blair replies steadily, her expression unwavering.
Nor will I bother you with trivial things like love, she adds, knowing he values his independence and borders above all else. My proposal, I will cooperate fully in uncovering the truth behind the Empress's palace fire incident from 10 years ago. Duke Delmark sits back in his high-backed chair, absorbing her words with a silent, calculating intensity. A dark shadow falls over the Duke's face as a mysterious, knowing smirk creeps onto his lips.
Huh.
The Duke lets out a low, amused chuckle, his sharp eyes gleaming with intrigue. The fire at the Empress's palace 10 years ago. If you accept my proposal, I will do everything in my power to help you uncover the truth of that day. The Duke smiles softly, thoroughly entertained by the princess's bold and unexpected leverage. Please help me, princess. A young boy's voice echoes from the past as a young Duke Delmark frantically pens a desperate letter under the dim blue light. My aunt is not that kind of person. You know that as well, your highness. Please clear my aunt's name. I don't remember anything. A young Blair whispers on the staircase, her words striking the boy like a physical blow as his eye widens in shock and betrayal. Liar, you're lying about not remembering, aren't you? In the end, you're taking your mother's side too? A deep sense of betrayal and resentment echoes in the darkness as the young boy falls to his knees in despair, weeping bitterly outside the locked palace doors. Even now, 10 years later, I have never forgotten that day. The memory lingers like a dark shadow in the Duke's mind. Why are you trying to go through with this marriage? He wonders silently, staring at her with deep suspicion. Duke Delmark looks down with a calm, handsome, but serious expression. Blair gracefully raises her teacup to take a sip, sitting in her elegant drawing room chair. Through her fine netted veil, Blair's sharp eyes look on with resolve. In a dark, monochromatic memory, a young Duke Delmark embraces a silver-haired young woman in despair. Blair brings her teacup to her lips, her expression calm and unreadable. I don't believe in things like that, Blair states calmly, sitting opposite the Duke at the tea table. Holding her teacup, Blair adds, I prefer a relationship with clear boundaries. Duke Delmark sits back in his ornate chair, holding his cup and looking towards Blair with a silent, calculating intensity. In a flashback of their childhood, a young Duke declares with a bright gaze, I'm going to leave the Empire and travel the wide world. The young, blushing Blair looks back at him in awe and asks, when I become an adult later, can you take me to the sea? Back in the present, a sudden wave of emotion washes over the Duke as his hand subtly tightens. Duke Delmark breaks the tense silence of the drawing room, stating, I accept that proposal. The crucial condition for this marriage was obtaining the Emperor's approval to increase the Delmark Duchy's military troops. Under the pretext of treason, the Delmark forces had been cut in half, but an increase in manpower was absolutely essential to monitor the northern borders and subjugate demonic beasts. On top of securing military power, the marriage offered a golden opportunity to finally uncover the hidden truth of that day. I don't know what her scheme is, Herden calculates silently, but if I can use the princess to find the truth and then get a clean divorce, it's the best possible outcome. Herden abruptly stands and turns to leave, his sudden movement drawing Blair's surprised gaze. Blair slightly parts her lips as if wanting to call out to him, but the words remain caught in her throat. Herden pauses as he receives his coat and asks, yes? To which Blair quickly looks away and replies, no, it's nothing. Once alone, Blair tightly squeezes her dress, her knuckles whitening as she wrestles with her inner turmoil. Blair realizes she wouldn't be able to get an answer from the current Herden anyway, as a single, painful question remains that she could never bring herself to ask him. Blair softly calls out to the Herden from her memory. Herden. Staring at his retreating figure, she asks the haunting question, did you kill me? One day before the wedding, a quiet light falls over a moss-covered stone cross monument in the churchyard. Blair's gloved hands carefully adjust a small, rustic bouquet of white tulips and delicate blue forget-me-nots. Blair crouches before the grave, whispering, I wonder if she's angry that I ignored her for 10 years. And am only now trying to recover my memories, she confesses, touching the cold stone. Because regardless of which side was the truth, I would end up losing one mother, Blair muses sadly. But I only ended up ruining my own health, she thinks, remembering the dark days of her childhood spent sick in bed under medical care. The memory of Herden's harsh words from the past echoes back to her. You turned a blind eye for 10 years, and now you're feeling guilty? Don't do anything anymore, his cold voice continues. Just stay still, just as you have done until now. The words sting like ice in her memories. But Blair stands tall, knowing that nothing will ever change if she keeps running away and avoiding the past. A maid approaches her with a somber bow, announcing, "The Grand Empress Dowager is waiting for you." That is why, in this life, Blair is fully determined to face the ugly truth and move forward without hesitation. A sudden, violent flashback of a hand heavily slapping Blair across the face resurfaces. "There is a limit to how much you can ignore your mother," Katrina shrieks in a fury. "How can you visit that woman the day before your wedding? Those women who tried to kill you." "I am your mother," Katrina rages at her terrified maids. "I'm the one who carried you for 10 months and gave birth to you." Blair gently holds her stinging cheek, her heart heavy with the familiar pain of her mother's abusive outburst. "Blair, you must become a woman who is loved, just like your mother," the manipulative voice commands. "Think about the end that woman met because she wasn't loved. The poison is dripped into her ears, jealous and envious of those who were loved. To self-destruct in the end? What a pathetic and useless life," Katrina whispers, her fingers gripping young Blair's chin. From the moment she reached womanhood, Blair was subjected to strict weight management and trained tirelessly on how to be loved. She forced herself to endure it all, believing that if she were perfect, her mother wouldn't hate her and everyone would see her as beautiful. She starved and perfected her image, clinging to the desperate hope that everyone would finally love her. But the only true, pure love she ever knew was holding her precious baby boy, Asiel, in her arms. Even if it hurts, she must admit it now. Her mother's obsession was never about love. "And then, you must become a great support for this imperial family that your brother and I have built," Katrina's voice echoes, as Blair realizes, "This thing directed at me is not love." Blair looks her mother dead in the eye and asks coldly, "Since when did you care for me so much, mother?" With her eyes flashing crimson with malice, Katrina sneers as the maids shudder in fear. It would be troublesome if the bride's face were scarred, wouldn't it? Blair feels the weight of her mother's words as she is reminded of her duty to be a great support for the imperial family. Katrina sneers at Blair, accusing her of driving a stake through her mother's heart with her insolence. With her mind made up, Blair steps forward, determined to leave behind her ignorant past. Blair stands alone in the sunlit corridor of the palace, taking a deep breath of resolve. The majestic imperial palace is blanketed in a cold, serene layer of falling snow. Blair's brother, the Emperor, advises her from behind that being loved is the only surefire way to secure her place in the Delmark family. He continues with a knowing smile, suggesting that while being a proper lady is fine, she must act like a bit of a vixen at home to be truly loved. Flashbacks of Katrina's abusive control and the heavy expectations she placed on Blair weigh heavily on her mind as she prepares for her wedding. Dressed in a magnificent white gown, Blair walks hand in hand with her groom down the long, elegant blue carpet of the wedding aisle. The wedding guests whisper in admiration, marveling at the bride and commenting that she looks like a literal snow fairy. Duke Delmark stands tall and striking at the altar, dressed in a magnificent, decorated white military uniform as he awaits his bride. The Emperor smiles warmly as he hands Blair over, announcing to the Duke that she was raised with utmost care. From a high vantage point, the Grand Priest begins conducting the marriage ceremony before the silent congregation. The priest smiles warmly and reads from his open scripture, blessing the union between the two nobles. Blair stands at the altar as a woman of pure white, perfectly embodying her flawless title before all who watch. Under the bright, holy light, the Duke and Princess share a gentle, solemn kiss to seal their marriage vows. In the quiet office of the Delmark estate, a pile of paperwork and rolled scrolls sit under a soft light as the work is finally called to a close. Ruth gasps in disbelief at the sheer volume of paperwork Herden plows through daily, only to let out a startled scream when he sees the Duke's intense expression. Surprised to find Herden working, Ruth asks what he is doing in his office on his actual wedding night. Herden notes that Ruth sounds disappointed to see him, to which Ruth honestly replies that he doesn't want to be stuck alone with his boss in the middle of the night. Ruth points out how terrible it looks for a newlywed groom to pick a mountain of paperwork over his bride on their very first night, warning that rumors are bound to spread. Ignoring Ruth's warnings, Herden silently sits back down at his desk and takes a document, while Ruth sighs and holds a folder. Ruth asks what the Duke's plan is going forward now that the marriage has been finalized. Herden reflects on Blair's promise to fully cooperate in uncovering the truth behind the palace fire incident 10 years ago. Staring coldly, Herden admits to himself that he still cannot tell if the princess has truly lost her memories or if she is merely faking it for some hidden agenda. Ruth asks again, seeking confirmation on whether the Duke truly intends to avoid the bridal chamber entirely. Hurden dismisses the concern, claiming she is likely already asleep since such a long day would have exhausted a frail woman like her. Hurden stares quietly at the quill in his hand, a brief, silent hesitation washing over his expression. Pushing his chair back with a soft scrape, Hurden abruptly stands up, surprising Ruth with his sudden movement. A subtle, knowing smile plays on the Duke's lips as he decides to head toward the bridal chamber after all. Hurden wonders what kind of expression the doll-like princess will make when her unwelcome husband suddenly shows up in her quarters. With a firm hand, Hurden pushes open the grand doors to the bridal suite, stepping silently inside. Looking around, Hurden quietly notes that the room is much smaller and more modest than he would have expected for an imperial princess. He observes the cold, pale winter light filtering into the room as the white snow continues to pile outside the window. Hurden's gaze is drawn to Blair, who sits like a delicate figure of pure white framed perfectly within the wintry scenery. Creeping up behind her, Hurden breaks the silence, whispering that he expected her to be fast asleep by now. Gasps escape Blair as she clutches her nightgown in shock, asking when he arrived, while Hurden coolly questions why she is so startled. He leans closer, pointing out with a lingering gaze that it is their wedding night, and thus only natural for a husband and wife to spend it together. Spotting the documents she was frantically writing, Hurden looks down and curiously asks what they are. Blair composedly explains that it is their contract, stating that since this marriage is a business deal, she thought it best to put all the terms in writing. The written document outlines that the contract will last for 1 year, but will terminate immediately once the truth of the palace fire is revealed, with liabilities following imperial law. The contract also specifies that during this 1-year period, both parties must respect one another as husband and wife to keep up appearances. Respect is defined as fulfilling marital duties to maintain outward appearances, which includes eating meals together at least once a week and attending official events hand in hand. Blair gazes at him, her chest tight with anxiety as she waits for his reaction to her detailed conditions. Looking over the written pages, Hurden raises an eyebrow and asks what the consequences will be if the terms of this contract are not met. Realizing she needs a penalty to ensure he actually complies, Blair pauses to contemplate what the punishment for breach of contract should be. As Blair speaks, Hurden suddenly lets out a quiet, knowing chuckle that catches her off guard. Blair stares at him in sheer disbelief, her heart skipping a beat as she wonders if the cold Duke actually smucked at her. The contract includes a startling clause. If either party desires to share a bed, they must fulfill their marital duties at least twice a month. With a slow, deliberate motion, Hurden taps his fingers on the written contract, thoroughly amused by his new wife's terms. Hurden leans in close to Blair, whispering in her ear with a teasing, dark look, "I assume this sharing a bed you mentioned doesn't just mean holding hands while we sleep?" A text bubble against a swirling dark background asks, "Are you saying you'll play the role of a mistress just to keep my bed warm?" Blair looks flustered and defensive as she protests, "Don't say it like that. While in her thoughts, she reminds herself, "I need a valid justification for when the time comes to have Asiel." Blair closes her eyes in deep distress, her face filled with anxiety and sadness against a cold, snowy atmosphere. Blair turns away slightly, her face downcast, while Hurden stands close behind her, his gaze lingering on her. Hurden looks down thoughtfully, whispering with a smirk, "A good relationship, huh?" Hurden pulls Blair closer to him, their bodies pressing together in the dim lighting of the bridal suite. Hurden gently lifts Blair's chin, his large hand holding her face as she gasps softly in surprise. In a romantic, flower-filled embrace, Hurden leans down and passionately kisses Blair, saying, "Right here, right now." Under the soft, glowing light of the room, Hurden continues to hold Blair close and kisses her deeply. A shadow of the couple kissing is cast upon the wall as they share an intimate embrace on their wedding night. Blair's face flushes a deep pink as Hurden kisses her passionately, his fingers tangled in her golden hair. Blair trembles slightly as Hurden places a gentle, warm kiss on her neck, her hands gripping his shirt in nervousness. Hurden's hand reaches up to untie the silk robe around his waist as his thoughts echo. "That's right, this isn't love. I'm not even pretending to love her for some other purpose." Hurden lets his shirt fall from his broad, muscular shoulders as he looks down at Blair on the bed. Blair lies back on the bed, her cheeks flushed bright red, clutching her nightgown with a look of vulnerability and nervousness. Hurden gently strokes her hair as Blair lies back, staring up at him with wide, anxious eyes. Blair stares up at him, thinking to herself, "This must be what it feels like to be overwhelmed by someone's gaze." Hurden hovers over Blair on the bed, looking down at her intensely as he says, "If you do that, it makes me feel like a bastard ravishing his wife rather than a man in a loving relationship." Blair pulls Hurden close, wrapping her arms tightly around his shoulders as they share a deep, intimate connection. Herden smiles down at Blair, thinking perhaps, as Blair said, it might be more exciting to just satisfy my own desires. Blair lies on the bed with her hair spread out, her expression filled with a mix of pleasure and sorrow, while Herden's inner voice notes, I can't lose the precious witness to that incident to my lust. Herden looks down with a solemn, intense expression, while Blair has tears streaming down her flushed face as she gasps. A narration box reads, she looks beautiful as she takes all of me in. An artistic grayscale memory panel of Blair wearing her wedding veil is framed by falling snowflakes, accompanied by Herden's thoughts. I never doubted that she was pretty, but it's also true that I wasn't particularly moved by it. Under the bright light, Herden passionately kisses Blair, holding her hand tightly as the narration continues, pure and white as if sculpted from moonlight. Her teary violet, Blair's violet eyes are filled with tears that stream down her cheeks as she experiences the overwhelming intimacy. A dark silhouette of Katrina with flashing red eyes looms behind Herden's memory as he thinks, for a split second, I almost forgot whose daughter she is. Herden pulls back slightly, breathing heavily with a sweat-covered neck as a silent, contemplative look washes over his face. A warm, glowing, dreamlike vision shows a hand gently touching Blair's cheek. Blair looks down with a sad, wistful expression as she sits alone, lost in her memories. Blair is embraced warmly by Herden in her memory as the text reads, how desperate he was to pry the truth out of me. Blair closes her eyes with a sad smile, thinking, and how naive I was to believe him. Against a dark, swirling background, a red warning box appears, stating, don't forget, Blair. Blair sits curled up alone on her large bed, hugging her knees sadly as she remembers, he doesn't love you. The next morning, a maid looks thoroughly annoyed, muttering, honestly, the Duke is too much. The maid brushes Blair's long hair as she angrily rants, how could he leave his bride to sleep alone on her wedding night? While Blair calmly replies, I'm fine. It's actually more comfortable sleeping alone. The maid continues to feel upset on Blair's behalf, saying, still, yesterday wasn't just any day, it was your wedding night, before Blair gently calls out, Lena. In a cute chibi illustration, Lena jumps up in shock and waves her brush frantically, saying, oh, I'm sorry, I got a bit carried away. Lena holds her hairbrush and continues with a pout. He shouldn't treat a wife who married him for love like that. Blair asks with a curious smile, how do you know so much when you've never even been married? To which Lena proudly boasts, I read it in books, the fountain of knowledge and food for the soul. Blair asks knowingly, you mean those books with the red stickers? Causing Lena to blush bright red and gasp, oh my, when did you see those? Lena quickly clears her throat to change the subject, brushing Blair's hair again while noting, anyway, the Duke looks exactly like a romantic lead, but I think we'll have to wait and see about his character. Suddenly, a glowing red magic circle flashes on Blair's neck, catching her completely off guard. Blair gasps in shock and stands up quickly, staring at her reflection in the mirror as she exclaims, a magic circle? Looking around the room, Blair sees nothing unusual and wonders, was I just imagining it? Blair notices Lena's hands, which are heavily wrapped in bandages, and her violet eyes widen in suspicion. Blair confronts her maid, pointing out, that wasn't there when you helped me bathe last night. Lena hides her bandaged hands behind her back and quickly fibs, oh no, I just got a little cut while working this morning. Lena gives a polite smile and requests, please don't worry about it, while Blair stares at her silently, her mind filled with deep suspicion. Lena continues to express her frustration with a frown, holding a hairbrush in her hand and pointing out that the Duke shouldn't treat a wife who married him for love so poorly, especially since she is in a strange castle surrounded by strangers. Gently placing her bandaged hands on Blair's shoulders, Lena kindly asks her to sit back down so they can finish her hair before she goes to eat. As Lena carefully styles Blair's long hair, Blair looks off to the side, reflecting with regret that in her past life she was far too caught up in her own problems to look after her maid. A close-up view shows Lena's hand heavily wrapped in white bandages as she gently braids Blair's long blonde hair. Lena smiles encouragingly as she finishes styling Blair's hair, playfully telling her that the only thing she needs to worry about is how to make that handsome Duke cry. Lena gives a cheerful smile and offers to show Blair the way to the dining hall. Blair, dressed in a stunning dark gown, enters the grand high-ceilinged dining hall where Herden is already seated at the far end of an incredibly long table. Sitting upright at the dining table, Herden looks exceptionally handsome and cold in his dark attire, his piercing blue eyes fixed ahead. From behind the servant standing near the doorway, the vastness of the elegant dining hall is revealed as the couple sits at opposite ends of the long table, the sound of clinking silverware echoing in the quiet room. Using a fork to lift a piece of food, Herden calmly states that after their meal, the butler will introduce the estate servants to her. Herdine continues detailing the day's light schedule, explaining that after a tour of the estate, she will be free to rest, to which Blair politely replies with a quiet thank you. As he cuts his steak, Herdine casually invites her to speak up if she has any questions or anything else on her mind. While cutting her own meal, Blair takes the opportunity to directly ask him how he plans to investigate the palace fire from 10 years ago. The sudden clinking of Herdine's silverware echoes through the room as he halts his movements, remaining silent in response to her serious question. Blair looks down slightly, a bead of sweat on her cheek, hesitating as she senses the sudden heavy tension in the air. A dark, grayscale memory flashes back to a therapist or doctor holding a ticking pocket watch in front of a distressed young Blair on a couch, attempting to help her recover her memories. Herdine looks up at her with a cool expression, bluntly pointing out that she is suspicious of him. As Blair honestly questions how she could possibly trust him, Herdine's reflection is shown in a glass decanter as his voice echoes his doubts about whether she truly lost her memory or is merely pretending. Herdine takes a bite of his food, coolly bringing an end to a sentence. Looking down with a solemn, resigned expression, Blair quietly whispers that she understands. An empty, elegant chair sits in the sunlit room as Herdine's voice decides that they will try hypnosis, just as she had previously suggested. The grand double doors click open to reveal a massive, beautifully designed imperial study filled with towering bookshelves. The butler leads Blair through the grand hallways, pointing out that the room across from them is the breakfast room, adding that the late master was exceptionally fond of it and the sunlit morning lounge. The distinguished head butler, Mason, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a neat tuxedo, turns to Blair with a polite gesture. Observing the dignified butler, Blair notes that Mason is a loyal servant who has dedicatedly served the Delmark family for generations. Mason continues the tour, fondly recalling how the late master always chose the window seat with a view of the garden, even when attending to distinguished guests. Listening to his words, Blair thinks to herself that although she already knew all of this from before her regression, hearing it again brings back an overwhelming flood of memories. Looking out the window at the glowing golden sunset, Mason apologizes with embarrassment, realizing he got carried away and didn't notice how late it had gotten. Walking down the long corridor, the butler suddenly stops and asks Blair to accept his apologies, prompting her to look back at him in confusion. Bowing slightly with a hand over his chest, Mason explains that he got ahead of himself in his eagerness, forgetting how exhausted she must be after her wedding, though he felt these were details the new mistress of the house ought to know. Blair stops in her tracks, her violet eyes widening slightly with soft surprise as she looks at the butler's sincere expression. Mason gasps softly in surprise, his eyes widening as he looks back at the new duchess. Fearing he might have overstepped, the butler hesitantly asks if she wishes to handle the household affairs herself when she could simply leave them to him, to which Blair replies that normally she would do just that. Blair stands tall and elegant in her dark purple gown, looking at him with a composed, resolute, and gentle expression. Mason stands silently before her, deeply moved and filled with a quiet sense of respect as he listens to his new mistress. Nodding respectfully, Mason promises to have the necessary documents ready for her by tomorrow, and Blair warmly smiles, saying she has a lot to learn from him and asking him to teach her well. A warm, genuine smile spreads across Mason's face as he bows deeply, clearly touched by her kind and humble attitude. Blair looks back over her shoulder with a quiet, thoughtful expression as she begins to walk back to her quarters. As her elegant dress rustles with each step, Blair thinks with determination that she no longer cares what anyone else thinks of her. Sitting in her chambers under the dim evening light, Blair touches her chin thoughtfully, deciding to use the time before bed to carefully organize her plans. Holding a quill over her journal, Blair gazes down with a serious and slightly melancholy expression, reminding herself that she only has 6 months left to achieve her goals. As she writes, her thoughts focus on the 3 major tasks she must resolve, the first of which is recovering her memories of the fire, a task she notes Herdine will be leading for now. Thinking of the cunning Ivan, Blair recalls that a divorce in the Empire requires the Emperor's consent, making her highly doubtful that Ivan, who pushed for this marriage specifically to trap Herdine, would ever agree to it. Looking at the shining white king chess piece on a chessboard, Blair reasons that Ivan will certainly never agree to the divorce if the fault of the marriage's breakdown is pinned on Herdine. A close-up of Blair's sharp violet eye reveals her deep focus as she contemplates a risky alternative strategy. A white queen chess piece is shown tipping over in the darkness as Blair's inner voice resolves that the one who must take the fault for the divorce is herself. Strategic plan begins to form as Blair looks at the chess pieces scattered across the board, realizing she must use public opinion to force the Emperor's hand. The white queen chess piece stands tall on the board next to a single pawn as Blair outlines her shocking plan to fabricate a scandal with another man. Behind the chess piece, the dark silhouettes of multiple disapproving nobles loom as Blair realizes that a scandal with just one man will not be enough to turn public opinion so drastically. As a hand moves chess pieces across the board, Blair's dark plan deepens, questioning what would happen if there were several men involved, creating an overwhelming rumor rather than a simple case of adultery. Blair contemplates her high-stakes plan, thinking that the public will surely aim their arrows at a woman who cheated on her husband. Sitting at her desk with a quill, Blair resolves that to achieve this fabricated scandal, she will first need to bribe several men. Pressing her hand flat against a map, Blair notes that with a scandal so disgraceful, she won't be able to remain in the Empire anyway. Looking out at a grand ship sailing across the ocean, Blair worries that if she is unlucky, Ivan or her mother might have her imprisoned, meaning she must leave the capital the moment the divorce is finalized. Standing on the balcony in simple traveling clothes, Blair looks off into the distance with a solemn, resolute expression. Sitting in her study and stretching her arms, Blair decides that she should pay a visit to the guild soon. A terrifying Grim Reaper holding a scythe looms as Blair reflects that her next major task is finding the mastermind who killed her before her regression, noting it is highly unlikely the assailant killed her out of a personal grudge. A grim flashback shows Blair lying on the ground, stabbed in the back with a dagger, as she resolves to find her killers and uncover the reason behind her murder. A quiet, dark memory of a young child lying asleep on the floor next to a plush teddy bear highlights the shadows of her past. Standing up from her desk, Blair decides to start with what is closest to her, planning to stop by the knight's training ground in the morning. Suddenly, Blair's violet eyes widen in shock as something catches her attention. Looking down at the document in her hands, Blair realizes with surprise that she has found their marriage contract. Looking at the contract in the dim light, Blair places her finger near her lips, realizing she needs to secure this document. Draped in a dark cloak, Blair gently pushes open the grand double doors of Herdine's quarters, offering a quiet apology for her sudden visit. A close-up shows Blair's bright violet eyes widening in utter astonishment at the sight before her. Standing by the window with a wet, bare chest and a loosely draped black robe, Herdine runs a hand through his dark hair, looking incredibly striking. Flustered, Blair flinches slightly and clutches the contract tightly to her chest. Turning around to face her, Herdine looks at her as she quickly explains that she realized they didn't finish the contract yesterday. Holding the rolled document, Blair plays it cool, telling herself that it is just a scrap of paper and that they only missed it because things were so hectic. Herdine reaches across his desk toward his inkstand and feather quill ready to sign. Leaning in closely, Herdine holds the quill and tells her to give it to him so he can sign it now and she can return to rest, but Blair quickly reaches out and grabs his wrist, asking him to wait. Looking up at him, Blair insists that he needs to review the contract carefully, to which Herdine questions if they didn't already do that yesterday, while silently noting that her hands are incredibly cold. Looking up at him with a serious expression, Blair replies that she might have changed something since their last review. Behind Blair, a warm memory of her smiling maid Lena appears, reminding her of the loyal people she must protect. Herdine looks back over her shoulder, asking if she is referring to the maid she brought from the Imperial Palace, to which Blair proudly replies that Lena is social and hardworking, so she will excel wherever she goes. A dark memory flashes of a blonde woman and a dark-haired man intimately together as Herdine's cool voice questions if she is planning to run away with a secret lover, noting that scandals involving morganatic marriages do happen occasionally. Handing her the paper, Herdine abruptly cuts the conversation short, noting that it is getting late. Looking at the long, elegant dining table being set by the castle maids, Blair quietly thinks to herself that she remembers how things used to be. Holding the document close, Blair looks up at him and requests that he accompany her to any events involving her brother or the imperial family. Looking at her with a piercing gaze, Herdine points out that as her husband, he must remain beyond reproach, while inwardly labeling her naive yet persistent. Nodding calmly, Herdine concedes that her request makes sense and promises to keep it in mind. Standing alone, Blair looks down at the ring on her hand with a pensive, determined expression. Standing in his quiet chamber, Herdine rests his hand on his temple, letting out a weary sigh. A passionate memory flashes back, showing Blair clinging to him desperately, barely able to breathe. Standing in the dark room, Herdine looks out the window, his back to the viewer as his mind races with intense thoughts. Herdine remembers Blair standing before him, wearing a white nightgown that left absolutely nothing to the imagination. A close-up highlights the delicate silver necklace resting on Blair's collarbone as she stood before him. Intimate grayscale memories of their passionate nights flash through his mind, accompanied by his conflicting thoughts that she is the daughter of his enemy, a woman he should hate and must despise, and that he can never forget that fact. Standing in his grand chambers, Herdine looks down at his hand, questioning if he is slowly going crazy. Looking at his dark robe discarded on the floor by the window, Herdine chides himself with irritation, thinking he is acting like a dog in heat. The scene shifts to the snow-covered castle courtyard, where a large group of knights are gathered for morning training. A knight is violently knocked to the ground with a loud crash, crying out in pain. Standing tall in the center of the training ground, the formidable commander with sharp golden eyes commands the next knight to step forward, leaving the onlookers in absolute terror. From the crowd, the knights look on in sheer shock as another challenger steps forward to face the terrifying commander. The knight lunges forward, but his eyes widen in panic as a swift, powerful strike comes fast from his blind spot. With an effortless sweeping strike, the golden-eyed commander completely disarms his opponent, sending the sword flying into the air. Sweating profusely, the defeated knights wonder who could have possibly upset the commander, noting that they haven't even seen him because of the wedding, and questioning why a newlywed groom is blowing off so much steam first thing in the morning. As punishment, a line of sweating knights are forced to hold headstands on the cold ground. Turning to the side, one of the knights hesitantly asks the Duke's aide if he has any idea what is going on. With a knowing smile, the Duke's aide, wearing round glasses and a blue uniform, shrugs off the question, while in the background, Blair and Mason are seen walking toward the training grounds. Dressed in an elegant gown and a dark bonnet tied neatly under her chin, Blair walks gracefully through the snow, accompanied by her butler. Looking down from an aerial view, Blair and her butler approach the snow-covered training grounds where the Knights of Delmark are gathered. Walking with poise, Blair notes that although she greeted the servants yesterday, she hasn't had the chance to meet the knights yet. Blair explains that she wanted to stop by and say hello before heading to the palace, while the watching knights whisper among themselves, wondering if she is already trying to play the mistress of the house. In the background, the Duke's aide watches closely as a narration box explains that the Knights of Delmark are war veterans who survived the brutal battlefields alongside His Grace. Blair walks up to Herdine, who stands with his back turned to her on the snow-covered grounds. Walking side by side, Blair and Herdine make a striking couple, though a quiet tension lingers between them. The Knights of Delmark drop to one knee in a respectful salute as Blair warmly thanks them for the welcome despite her sudden visit. A close-up highlights Blair's stunning beauty and bright blue eyes as she smiles gently, framed by beautiful white flowers and a warm light. Her gentle smile fades as Blair's expression turns serious and analytical while she observes the knights. Clasping her gloved hands tightly, Blair reminds herself that she does not need to try to impress them or work hard to earn their approval. Looking down thoughtfully, Blair reveals her true, hidden motive. Her real reason for being at the training grounds is to search for a vital clue. Looking back over her shoulder, Blair keeps her sharp focus on the rows of kneeling knights. A view of the high castle walls is accompanied by a dark dagger as Blair's thoughts outline that the knights are highly skilled war veterans, meaning her killer had to bypass heavy security to infiltrate her villa before her regression. As a close-up focuses on Blair's sharp profile, she reasons that the assassin must have been incredibly skilled. Over a scene of kneeling knights, her thoughts continue, suggesting that the culprit might have been an insider of the duchy. The shadow of Herdine looms behind Blair as her dark thoughts conclude that this is one of the reasons she suspects him of being the mastermind behind her death. Blair recalls a crucial detail about the man who stabbed her. He had a hideous scar on the bridge of his nose. Walking past the lines of kneeling knights, Blair's heart pounds as she carefully inspects each face, searching for anyone matching that description. Suddenly, a close-up of Blair's violet eyes shows her pupils dilating in sheer shock as her gaze locks onto someone. Standing among the knights is a man with a distinct, deep scar running across the bridge of his nose, looking downward with a heavy expression. Sweat trickles down Blair's face as she looks back in sheer disbelief, her mind racing at the unexpected discovery. Looking back at the group, Blair tries to calm herself, realizing with relief that at least none of these men are actually the suspicious person who killed her. Closing her eyes, Blair lets out a soft, relieved sigh to compose herself. Standing between Herdine and his spectacled aide, Blair turns her attention back to the Duke. Herdine runs a hand over his face, looking exhausted and sweaty from his intense morning workout. Noticing his exhaustion, Blair pulls out a delicate lace handkerchief and offers it to him, gently advising him to wipe his sweat before he catches a cold. Herdine coolly replies that he is fine as he turns away, leaving the spectacled aide in the background completely flabbergasted by the awkward exchange. Holding his chin in deep thought, the spectacled aide sweats nervously, wondering who in their right mind would ever look at these two and think they're newlyweds. Looking at their backs as they walk away, the aide sighs inwardly, noting that while he didn't expect her to be showered with love, he certainly didn't want to see her get rejected so harshly to her face. With a quiet sigh, the spectacled aide turns and walks away into the cold courtyard. Blair walks ahead in silence, her expression thoughtful and composed. Following a few steps behind, Herdine walks silently, maintaining his usual stern demeanor. Suddenly, an adorable little boy with rosy cheeks pops out from the bushes, giggling happily as he holds a leaf.
Running forward blindly, the toddler bumps right into Blair's long skirts, scattering dark berries onto the snow.
The little boy tumbles backward onto his bottom on the cold ground, letting out a soft oof as his berries roll away. The Duke's spectacled aide gasps in absolute horror, his eyes widening in sheer panic at the scene. Hurrying forward frantically, the aide's mind races with worry, thinking that Blair must already be in a terrible mood and might lash out. Quickly scooping up the child, the aide frantically explains to Blair that the boy is from the annex and must have wandered out while his mother was working. As Blair silently looks at the child, she reflects on how a member of the imperial family would react to such behavior, especially the daughter of the notorious Katrina, while the aide promises to return him and warn his mother. Instead of getting angry, Blair steps forward and bends down toward the frightened child with a gentle rustle of her dress. Looking at the little boy softly, Blair gently speaks his name, saying, "Jeremy. I see Jeremy." Blair smiles with genuine warmth as she holds the little boy's hands, making him giggle happily. Watching this unexpected display of kindness, the spectacled aide blushes intensely, completely captivated and touched by Blair's sweet nature. Standing nearby, Herdine looks back over his shoulder, watching Blair with a silent, intense, and slightly surprised expression. A beautiful close-up highlights Blair's face glowing with warmth and happiness as she smiles gently at the little boy. As Blair continues to play with the child, both Herdine and his aide watch her from a short distance, captivated by her radiant warmth. The scene transitions to a grand, sunlit mansion hallway with a magnificent white marble staircase and shimmering light. At a long, lavish dining table, a group of noble guests are gathered for a feast. A guest remarks that when people called them a beautiful couple, they just took their word for it. But seeing them now, they truly are a picture-perfect pair. Laughing delightedly at the compliment, an older noblewoman and a handsome, light-haired noble smile warmly, with the man proudly agreeing that it indeed fills him with pride. At the dining table, Blair and Hernine listen as a guest remarks that since the Delmark family line is thin, it would be best for them to have at least 3 children. Holding a glass of red wine, the Emperor smiles warmly as the conversation continues. Lifting his wineglass in a toast, Herdine listens as the Emperor raises his glass for the eternal glory and prosperity of the Empire. After the meal is finished, the Emperor changes the topic, asking for the Duke's opinion on an important matter. As a map of the continents is shown, the discussion turns to the booming trade routes that have opened up with the eastern continent. Leaning against his hand, the Emperor expresses his desire to open a nearby sea route to trade even more actively. The Emperor asks Herdine for his thoughts, while Blair looks on in silent, sweating panic, sensing the underlying trap. Blair analyzes the situation, realizing the Emperor wants to seize the eastern ports and is using his greatest magic swordsman as a pawn to clear the path. A fiery vision of war flashes before Herdine's eyes as he realizes the Emperor's willingness to authorize more troops was all a setup. The Emperor acts as though war is just a game of chess, caring only about capturing the enemy's pieces with a simple flick of his finger. Observing her intense anxiety, Herdine glances sideways at Blair, who is trembling in her seat with distress. Herdine decides that he can pretend to listen to the Emperor's proposals, if only for the sake of his new one-year wife. Taking a sip of his wine, Herdine calmly prepares to give his answer to the Emperor's question. A close-up highlights Herdine's intense, serious eyes as he observes the imperial family's greed. Tensions rise at the long dining table as Blair prepares to speak up in defense of her husband. Suddenly, Blair reaches out and firmly grasps Herdine's hand, courageously telling the Emperor not to push her husband into war just to serve his own ends. Horrified by her bold interruption, the Empress furiously reprimands Blair for being so unrefined in front of their guests. The Emperor smugly tells his mother to leave Blair alone, mockingly stating that she could never understand the heart of a monarch who cares for his people, since she has never studied monarchology. In a surprising display of defense, Herdine tightly grasps Blair's hand, declaring that his wife hasn't said anything particularly wrong. Herdine boldly defends Blair's words, asking how there could be any disrespect in plain speaking for the sake of His Majesty's virtuous government. A close-up focuses on the Empress's face as she glares at Herdine in furious shock. The Empress coldly remarks that they say a daughter becomes a stranger once she is married, looking at Blair with disdain. Standing up to leave, Herdine firmly states that he should be the one to look after his own wife. The Empress and Emperor look on in stunned silence, completely caught off guard by the Duke's bold defiance. Herdine pulls Blair close to his side, smoothly changing the subject by mentioning that heirs are indeed quite rare in the Delmark family. Blair rests her head against Herdine's chest, stunned and overwhelmed by his unexpected protection. The grand carriage of Delmark speeds away from the imperial palace, carrying the couple back home. Inside the carriage, a heavy silence hangs in the air as Blair and Herdine sit opposite each other. Herdine looks silently out the window of the moving carriage, his expression unreadable and stern. Turning his gaze back inside, Herdine quietly observes Blair's downcast demeanor. Looking down in deep regret, Blair struggles with her conflicting emotions as they ride in silence. The distance between them feels palpable as they sit on opposite sides of the carriage, lost in their own thoughts. Feeling exhausted, Herdine closes his eyes and leans his head back against the carriage wall. Breaking the quiet silence, Blair looks down and softly apologizes to Herdine. Blair continues, expressing her deep remorse for letting him be used by her mother and brother's relentless greed. Herdine watches Blair quietly, reflecting on the lingering resentment and complex feelings that have taken root in his heart. Blair blinks slowly, her eyelids growing heavy as the long and exhausting day catches up with her. Drifting off to sleep, Blair's head nods forward as her eyes close completely. Lulled by the motion of the carriage, Blair loses her balance and begins to fall forward, surprising Herdine. Reacting instantly, Herdine catches Blair in his arms before she can fall onto the carriage floor. Letting out a quiet sigh, Herdine pulls Blair close to his chest, cradling her as she sleeps. Blair rests peacefully in Herdine's strong embrace, completely unaware of her surroundings. Herdine recalls how Blair used to look like a doll without emotions, never showing any change in expression no matter how sharp his words were. Looking down at her sleeping face, Herdine admits that seeing her eyes lose their light under the cruelty of her mother and brother made his blood boil. A dark screen reflects the intense fury that erupted within Herdine as his thoughts declare that his blood boiled at her suffering. Holding her tightly, Herdine's possessive thoughts conclude that making her cry, tormenting her, and breaking her should only ever be his right. Feeling a shift in movement, Blair slowly opens her eyes and sleepily calls out Herdine's name. Blair is startled to find herself being carried in Herdine's arms as he steps out of the carriage. Flushing red with embarrassment, Blair frantically asks when she fell asleep and desperately begs Herdine to put her down. Carrying her up the steps of the castle, Herdine coolly dismisses her protests, saying it is a hassle and they should just keep going. Herdine smiles gently as he carries Blair up the castle stairs, while she rests her head tiredly against his shoulder. Walking through the quiet hallways, a voice calls out, "Your Excellency." The spectacled aide rushes forward to announce that the hypnotist has just arrived, as Blair and Herdine look on in surprise. A polite, middle-aged man with glasses and a leather bag enters the room, introducing himself and saying, "It is an honor to meet you, Duchess." Blair glances nervously at Herdine, who stands further back with his arms crossed and a stern, intimidating expression on his face. Blair stands nervously next to the hypnotist, explaining the situation as Herdine silently observes them from across the room. Herdine steps closer, looking intensely at Blair as he declares, "As your husband, it's only right that I stay by your side." The hypnotist, Marcel, smiles warmly and understandingly, ready to begin the session. Blair looks down in deep thought, her mind filled with suspicion as she wonders why Herdine is really doing this and how she could ever trust him. Pointing to a comfortable armchair, Blair softly tells the hypnotist, "It's fine. Let's begin, Marcel." Marcel gently holds a sparkling crystal pendulum above Blair's face as she drifts into a light sleep, telling her, "You are going back 10 years, to the day of the fire at the Empress's palace." Marcel asks Blair if she was about 10 years old at the time, to which she sleepily replies in the affirmative, while Herdine watches the session with intense focus. In her slumber, Blair recalls her 10-year-old self walking through the palace, remembering how she sneaked to the Empress's palace because her mother didn't like her going there. The hypnotist coaxes her along, and Blair recalls arriving at the palace where Her Majesty the Empress welcomed her with a gentle, warm smile. Blair fondly remembers drinking warm cocoa, talking, and playing cards with the friendly palace maids before falling asleep under the watchful eye of the Empress. A peaceful close-up highlights young Blair sleeping soundly, unaware of the impending danger. Suddenly, the memory shifts to darkness, and young Blair finds herself sitting alone in a pitch-black room. Surrounded by hanging dresses, young Blair realizes she is locked inside a closet as thick smoke begins to creep in. In the present, Herdine's eyes widen with alarm and suspicion as he mutters, "A closet?" Sweat dripping down his face, Marcel urgently notes that the princess was supposed to have been found in the palace hallway, realizing this is where her missing memories begin. Marcel coaxes her to try going outside the closet, and young Blair slowly starts to move in the dark. Present Blair gasps in horror as a terrifying vision of roaring, bright red flames flashes before her mind's eye. Trembling and crying, young Blair cries out that she cannot go out, while Marcel frantically asks if the door is locked or if something else is wrong. Marcel attempts to soothe her distress, assuring her that she is perfectly safe and urging her to take a deep breath. Present Blair coughs heavily, wheezing that fire and smoke are coming in, but when Marcel tells her to step out of the closet, she gasps that the door won't open. Blair thrashes in her seat, crying out desperately for help as she struggles to breathe, prompting a worried Herdine to rush to her side. Marcel desperately urges her to open the door and escape the burning room, while Blair gasps and chokes in extreme agony. Grabbing Marcel's sleeve, Herdine commands him to wake her up, but Marcel frantically begs to continue, saying they are almost at the truth. Blair cries and trembles violently, while Marcel insists that they must break through this mental wall to reach her buried memories. Marcel's voice echoes in Blair's mind, ordering her to open the door and get out to survive. Inside the burning closet, young Blair weeps in terror as massive, shadowy hands suddenly grab her shoulders. Angry and unable to watch her suffer any longer, Herdine aggressively grabs the hypnotist by his collar. Glaring at the terrified hypnotist with glowing blue eyes, Herdine furiously shouts, "I said stop and wake her up." Snapping out of her trance with a sharp gasp, Blair hears Herdine frantically calling her name. Blair gasps for air, tears streaming down her pale face as she trembles uncontrollably from the trauma of the memory. Herdine looks down at Blair, his stern expression softening into one of deep concern and worry. Herdine gently lifts Blair in his arms as she coughs and gasps for breath, softly reassuring her, "Take it slow, just breathe." Laying her down gently, Herdine cradles Blair's head as she slowly catches her breath and recovers from the hypnosis. Herdine turns his gaze away, his expression solemn and thoughtful as he contemplates what she went through. Blair weakly reaches out, grabbing Herdine's sleeve to stop him and whispering, "Herdine, wait a moment." Looking up at him with wide, exhausted eyes, Blair reveals, "I heard a faint voice in my memories just now." Herdine turns back to her, surprised and curious as he asks, "What?" Blair explains that she had never heard that mysterious voice in her memories until today, as a vision of young Blair in the dark room flashes in her mind. Leaning in close to her face, Herdine looks at her intently and says, "Does that really matter right now?" Looking down sadly, Blair asks in a soft, remorseful tone, "Are you angry because I couldn't hold on longer?" Herdine turns away to give her space, coldly stating, "Don't worry, won't affect our contract." Looking towards the fireplace, Herdine quietly tells her, "Just rest." Herdine quietly exits the room, closing the door behind him and leaning his head against his hand in deep frustration. Blair lies awake in the dark room, staring blankly at the ceiling as Herdine's cold reminder of their contract echoes in her mind. In the quiet hallway, Herdine grits his teeth in irritation, frustrated that his fake wife can never say a word without bringing up their contract. Herdine looks down with a stern, plotting expression, thinking to himself that Blair seems to be betting her life on their one-year contract. In the grand hallway, the spectacled aide bows politely to Herdine, informing him that he has sent the hypnotist back to his room for the time being. Glaring back over his shoulder, Herdine coldly commands his startled aide to fire the hypnotist immediately. Herdine turns and walks away in silence, leaving his aide standing alone and bewildered in the middle of the corridor. The aide watches Herdine's retreating figure with a deeply worried and confused expression, unsure of what caused the Duke's sudden wrath. A tense close-up focuses on Herdine's sharp, calculating blue eyes as he reflects on the disturbing details revealed during the hypnosis session. Left alone in the quiet hallway, the aide gulps nervously, a bead of sweat rolling down his cheek in the lingering tension. Inside the study, a young maid stands with her hands nervously clasped together, her expression filled with anxiety and fear. Standing in the spotlight of the dark room, the maid wonders in distress why the Duke has suddenly summoned her to his office. She anxiously squeezes her hands, one of which is heavily wrapped in bandages, desperately hoping she isn't in any sort of trouble. Looking up at Herdine's imposing figure, the maid frantically defends herself in her mind, thinking that the Duke is the one who abandoned his bride and that she did nothing wrong. Herdine stares out the window into the snowy night, recalling how the fireplace in Blair's room was completely cold and unlit despite the freezing weather.
Startled out of her thoughts, the maid quickly looks up to answer the Duke's sudden question.
A close-up of a lit candle lantern highlights the maid's explanation that while Blair is fine with light from a safe distance, open flames still make her incredibly uncomfortable. Herdine looks back at the maid from his desk, asking if her extreme discomfort is due to the tragic palace fire that occurred 10 years ago. Blair lies asleep and coughing weakly in her bed, as the maid confirms that her respiratory system was severely weakened as an after-effect of that fire. Herdine silently presses his cigar into the ashtray, extinguishing the burning ember as the maid watches him in suspense. Letting out a quiet sigh, Herdine leans his head back against his high chair, closing his eyes as he processes the tragic truth. The next morning, a silver pitcher and a wash basin sit quietly in the gentle morning light, signaling the start of a new day. Blair lies pale and shivering in bed, suffering from a high fever, as the doctor notes that a severe shock can drastically weaken a person's immune system. The doctor steps out of the bedroom, giving final instructions to the anxious maid who waits outside the door. In the quiet bedroom, Herdine sits silently in a chair right next to the bed, keeping a watchful eye on his sick wife. Resting his forehead in his hand, Herdine sighs in deep exhaustion and worry as Blair rests fitfully under the heavy blankets.
Sweat drips down Blair's pale, flushed face as she breathes heavily, caught in the throes of her intense fever.
A close-up of Herdine's eyes reveals his soft, concerned gaze as he watches over Blair's sleeping face. Reaching out gently, Herdine places the back of his hand against Blair's burning forehead to check her temperature. Feeling the heat of her fever, Herdine closes his eyes and lets out a heavy, tired breath, remaining steadfast by her side. Blair stirs weakly and rolls onto her side, whimpering in her sleep as Herdine watches her movements closely. Herdine leans in slightly, his expression softening as he gazes at her fragile sleeping form.
The heavy chair stands empty near the desk, leaving a quiet and somber atmosphere in the dimly lit bedroom.
Blair lies on her side, her long wavy blonde hair spilled across her back as she rests quietly. Herdine sits back in his chair, his eyes half closed as he contemplates his complex, growing feelings for his contract wife. A faded memory flashes in Herdine's mind, showing him sitting across a table from a noblewoman who coldly declares that she does not believe in things like love. Snapping back to the present, Herdine slowly stands up from his chair, placing his hand on the wooden armrest. A vision of young Blair looking cold and emotionless appears in his thoughts, accompanied by his irritation that she shares her name with a Delmark ancestor. Herdine walks quietly toward the door, leaving the sleeping Blair to rest in peace. Close-up shows the maid's bandaged hands carefully carrying a wooden wash basin filled with cool, clean water. Walking down the corridor, the maid smiles warmly and expresses her immense relief that her lady's fever broke so quickly. Two other maids carrying cleaning tools stop her in the hallway, praising her for working so hard late into the night. The maids express their concern for her, noting that the Duchess must be very ill and advising the hardworking maid to get some rest as well. Passing by her, they kindly remind her to take care of herself so her injuries can heal faster, warning her to watch her step. A flashback reveals the maid carrying a large vase of flowers, while another mysterious figure stands watching her from the dark shadows. The memory shifts to the vase falling and shattering violently on the wooden floor, water splashing everywhere in a sudden accident. Back in the present, the maid looks down at her tightly bandaged wrists, a silent reminder of her painful fall. Clutching the wash basin tightly, she turns and walks quietly down the empty, silent hallway. A pair of white-gloved hands presents a beautifully bound purple leather book decorated with elegant gold patterns. Still half dressed in his dark robe, Herdine reaches out to accept the book with a serious, questioning look. The maid explains that the tailor requested Herdine to choose the fabric for the Duchess's formal wear first. Flipping through the book of rare fabric samples, Herdine listens as the maid explains that the tailor wanted to secure the materials in advance. As Herdine looks at the fabrics, a final vision of Blair sleeping soundly flashes in his mind, whispering the mysterious name Asiel. Letting out a tired sigh, Herdine closes his eyes as he tries to process his exhaustion and complex thoughts. Herdine hands the beautifully bound purple and gold book back to his assistant, who receives it with a startled and respectful posture. Standing by the grand window as snow falls in the cold night, Herdine instructs his assistant, tell her to get fabric that keeps her warm, regardless of the price. Presenting a luxurious collection of rare fabrics, lace, and gloves, the designer says, "That's the message I received, so..." Baroness Siobel's designer introduces herself with an enthusiastic gesture and a bright, dramatic smile. Sitting gracefully on the sofa, Blair glances around the grand room with a quiet and observant expression. Gesturing elegantly, the designer calls out, "My lady?" while Blair looks up and replies, I'm sorry, I just noticed that one of my maids is nowhere to be seen." Blair speaks softly to the designer, saying, "I'm glad I recovered before our meeting. I also wanted to thank you for the wedding dress." The designer grins and replies, "The Empire's greatest beauty wore it, so I am the grateful one." Smiling warmly as she leans closer to Blair, the designer asks, "Shall we begin by looking over this first design together?" Waving cheerfully as she leaves the room, the designer bids her farewell, saying, "I will bring the dress with me next time." After the designer departs, Blair stands in the hallway looking back, a quiet suspicion lingering in her eyes. Blair turns to her maid with concern and asks, "Where did Lena go? I haven't seen her since she helped me get dressed." Smiling nervously with sweat on her face, the maid evasively responds, "Oh, I'm not sure. Should I go look for her?" While Blair stares back with a highly skeptical gaze. Blair reaches for her luxurious white fur cloak, wrapping it securely around her shoulders. As Blair prepares to leave, her nervous maid asks, "Are you going for a walk?" And Blair firmly replies, "Yes, I'm going alone." Blair walks determinedly down the spacious grand hallway of the mansion, ignoring the other servants. Blair walks down the wide staircase, her steady footsteps echoing quietly through the silent mansion. Walking with a brisk and purposeful stride, Blair moves quickly up the stairs to investigate the source of her worries. A maid stops her in the corridor to deliver an unexpected message, saying, "Madam, Baroness CNL is here to see you." Blair halts in surprise, her eyes widening as she processes the unexpected arrival of the Baroness. Standing by a cracked door, Blair overhears the other maids gossiping. One asks, "Hey, where did Lena go?" While another mockingly replies, "She's not crying somewhere just because she got splashed with dirty water, is she?" The maids snicker amongst themselves, saying Lena didn't even bat an eye and is tough like her mistress, though she will struggle to get the smell out. When one asks if she will tell, the other laughs and says that if she were going to do that, all hell would have broken loose by now. Suddenly entering the room with a cold, piercing gaze, Blair demands, "Why are you standing by the door?" As the startled maid stammers, "Madam?" Seeing Lena shivering in a corner with wet, dirty clothes, Blair's eyes fill with intense shock and rising anger. Blair looks at Lena with deep remorse, thinking, "Suddenly I realized she was enduring it all alone, worried my already bad reputation would get worse." Remembering Lena crying in her past life, Blair reflects sadly, "It must have been the same in my past life." Moving with sudden fury, Blair grabs the abusive maid's wrist with incredible force and commands, "Apologize." Pulling the trembling Lena close to her side, Blair glares at the terrified servants and repeats, "I told you to apologize to Lena." Trying to play dumb, the nervous maid stammers defensively, "I have no idea what you are talking about, my lady." Enraged by her lies, Blair delivers a sharp, powerful slap across the maid's cheek, thinking to herself, hitting someone for the first time? Looking at her trembling hand, Blair is overcome with a sudden wave of nausea and distress, thinking, "Felt so sickening and made my heart pound so hard that I felt like throwing up." Staring at the crying servant on the floor, Blair thinks in horror that she has acted just like her abusive mother. Stealing her resolve, Blair thinks, "But to protect Lena, I cannot back down," before glaring at the maid and declaring, "You know exactly what I am talking about." Lena desperately grabs Blair's arm, crying, "Your Highness, I'm really fine, I promise," while the slapped maid defensively mutters about Blair making a scene. Tears of pain and emotional exhaustion stream down Blair's pale face as she struggles to hold back her despair. Overcome by her emotions, Blair leans her head heavily against Lena's shoulder as her maid supports her gently. Suddenly, a firm, heavy footstep enters the room and a stern voice demands, "What is going on here?" Dean enters the room with his aide close behind, his commanding presence instantly changing the atmosphere as the servants tremble and say, "Your Grace." Dean's cold blue eyes scan the scene, observing the weeping, dirty Lena and the emotional Blair. Throwing herself onto her knees, the abusive maid pleads, "Your Grace, it seems the madam has made a misunderstanding. I was only punishing this girl because she couldn't do her job properly." Glaring down at the servant with absolute disdain, Dean coldly says, "I don't recall asking you," leaving her completely speechless. Dean turns his intense gaze toward Blair, observing her distressed and weeping state with deep seriousness. The other maids look on in absolute terror, biting their nails and sweating profusely as they await the Duke's wrath. Looking up with a desperate, calculating thought, the abusive maid tells herself, "Even so, what difference does it make? There's no way His Grace would take the side of the enemy's daughter." Glancing at Blair's sorrowful expression, the maid confidently thinks she must know that well enough herself. To the maid's absolute horror, Dean turns to Blair and says, "It is my oversight for failing to manage my subordinates properly," causing the maid to gasp, "What?" Standing tall, Dean commands firmly, "I will have these girls dismissed immediately," causing the maids to cry out in sheer horror. "What?" Terrified of causing more trouble, Lena steps forward to protect the maids, pleading, "Your Grace, it's really nothing. We were just playing a few pranks to get to know each other." Lena looks at Blair with pleading, desperate eyes, silently begging her mistress to help de-escalate the severe punishment. Blair closes her eyes and calms her breathing, before telling Dean softly, "I was angry, but I think that punishment is too harsh." Dean looks down with a cold and piercing gaze, his expression completely unreadable as he processes the situation. Throwing themselves to the floor, the terrified maids cry out in desperation, "Forgive us, Your Grace. Out of sheer foolishness, we have committed such a disgraceful act." Looking down at the kneeling servants, Dean coldly says, "You should apologize to my wife and this maid, not me." As one of the maids desperately begs, "Please forgive us just this once." As Dean's assistant bows deeply, the Duke keeps his sharp, intense eyes fixed forward, radiating a terrifying authority. Turning back toward Blair, Herdine adjusts his gloves and states with absolute calm, "I believe this is a more fitting punishment." Blair looks on in surprise as Herdine prepares to leave, simply replying, "Right." Leaning down, Herdine gently presses his forehead against Blair's hair, whispering softly, "I will be on my way then." Blair is left frozen in place, her wide eyes reflecting her shock and confusion as Herdine pulls away from her. Passing by the trembling maids, Herdine walks out of the room with a cold, imposing aura that leaves everyone shivering in his wake. Blair raises her hand to her temple with a heavy sigh, realizing that this severe display of authority was actually his silent warning to the servants. With the matter resolved, Herdine walks briskly down the grand hallway, followed closely by his faithful assistant. Standing alone in the room, Blair looks down at her hands, still processing the sudden intensity of the situation. Walking down the hallway with a wash basin of cool water, Lena thinks to herself with concern, at this rate, her lovely hands will be bruised. Looking down at the water, Lena sighs, honestly, to think she'd try to punish someone with hands that have never done a day of hard work. In a brief memory, Blair gently holds Lena's bandaged hands, her face filled with deep remorse as she whispers, "For realizing it so late." Remembering her mistress's sudden warmth and kindness, Lena's eyes well up with tears of gratitude. Opening the door with a warm smile, Lena says, "I thought it would be good to cool your hands with some cold water." Suddenly, the heavy metal wash basin falls to the floor with a loud, echoing crash, splashing water everywhere. Seeing Blair standing on the balcony railing under the bright full moon, a horrified Lena screams out, "Your Highness?" Running out in a panic, Lena throws her arms around Blair and desperately pulls her back, crying, "No, I won't let go. If your Highness insists on dying, then I will die with you," while a bewildered Blair pleads, "It's a misunderstanding. First, let go." In a comical panic, Lena drags her mistress away from the ledge by her waist, crying frantically, "Hurry and get back inside." Blair closes her eyes with an exhausted sigh, completely worn out by her maid's dramatic misunderstanding. Holding her maid's face gently, Blair clarifies, "I have somewhere to go in secret, so I was going to climb down using this," before asking with a soft smile, "Why are you crying?" Pointing to the makeshift rope of tied bed sheets hanging over the railing, Lena scolds her, "That's so reckless. What if you fell and got hurt?" But Blair calmly replies, "It's only the second floor, and there are bushes below." Looking at her deeply concerned maid, Blair lets out a warm, genuine smile. Lena stares blankly at her mistress, completely speechless at her sheer recklessness. Letting out a long, dramatic sigh of defeat, Lena closes her eyes and accepts that she cannot stop her stubborn mistress. Lena can only shake her head, thinking about how her mistress does the most reckless things sometimes. Dressed in a dark cloak, Blair looks back as Lena asks with deep concern, "So where on earth are you going at this hour?" An aerial view reveals a carriage waiting in the dark courtyard as Blair prepares for her secret nighttime excursion. Peeking out from the carriage window as they arrive at their destination, Lena asks nervously, "Is this Guild Street?" Stepping down from the carriage onto the cobblestone street, Blair instructs her maid, "I'll be right back." Looking out from the carriage door with a terrified expression, Lena calls after her, "I mean it." Blair waves a gloved hand dismissively to reassure her worried maid as she steps away into the snowy night. Wrapping her dark hood tightly around her face, Blair walks determinedly through the bustling, dimly lit streets. Blair reflects on her strategy, noting that the Information Guild is second to none, but since her dean is looking for new hypnotists, recovering her memories will be delayed. Reaching her destination, Blair pushes open the heavy wooden doors of the guild's tavern. Entering the lively, raucous tavern, Blair tells herself, "In the meantime, I should start preparing for the divorce." As the heavy doors swing open, a sudden hush falls over the tavern, and the rough patrons turn around to stare at the mysterious newcomer. Keeping her gaze steady, Blair walks confidently through the crowded room, ignoring the intense stares of the men drinking. The rough patron slams his hand on the table, muttering, "Wow, she's a beauty," while another asks from the shadows, "What brings a pretty lady like you here?" A shady man with long black hair steps into Blair's path, looking her up and down with an unsettling grin. Leaning uncomfortably close to her face, the man asks with a smug smile, "What brings a pretty lady like you here?" Another voice yells out from the crowd, mockingly asking, "Hey, who invited their girlfriend to the guild? Speak up!" The tavern erupts in crude laughter as one patron chuckles, "I think she's mine," and another retorts, "What are you talking about? She looks like my wife." Ignoring the jeers, Blair stands tall and demands in a firm, clear voice, "I am here to see the master of this guild." An eye patch-wearing man scoffs at her, adjusting his glove as he replies, "Our master is busy. He doesn't handle small-time business." Leaning in close with a sinister smile, the eye patch-wearing man whispers, "We'll get it done cheap and fast. Let's have a drink and talk it over." Grabbing the string of her dark cloak, the man sneers, "What's troubling our pretty lady that made her brave enough to come here?" Slipping her glove off to reveal her prominent, luxurious blue gemstone ring, Blair looks the man dead in the eye and commands, "Bring me to the master of this guild." Close up on the eye patch-wearing man's face, sweating in sudden shock as he gasps, "Ah!" Glaring at Blair, the eye patch-wearing man angrily demands, "Who do you think we are, stray dogs? You think we'll just wag our tails for money, huh?" While Blair remains completely calm. Looking at the man with utter composure, Blair asks, "Or do you not realize how foolish it is to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs?" Sweating nervously, the eye patch-wearing man looks away as the tavern patrons whisper in shock, asking, "What? Is she a big shot? Did we mess with the wrong person?" The bartender, a handsome man with silver hair and glasses, quietly polishes a glass as the other tavern staff and patrons look on in tense silence. A man wearing a plague doctor mask suddenly walks up, asking, "Ah, so we have a client?" as Blair looks back at him. The plague doctor stands in front of Blair, who stares at him in silence. Blair firmly says, "No, I wish to speak with the master," but the plague doctor answers, "I am the master of Lubellis." Blair bypasses him and turns to the silver-haired bartender, declaring, "I wish to make my request to the guild master of Lubellis." Setting his glass down with a soft click, the bartender asks with a calm smile, "May I ask why you thought I was the master?" Blair reveals her sharp observation. "When I asked for the master, everyone glanced at you to see your reaction, and you quietly stood by, simply listening to me." She then adds, "I will hear your reasons for testing me in due time." The silver-haired bartender smiles charmingly, adjusting his black glove under his chin. Guiding Blair into a luxurious private office, the man says, "Allow me to formally introduce myself, Duchess." Bowing elegantly with his hand over his chest, he introduces himself. "I am Mikhail Kynes." As Blair sits on the sofa, Mikhail stands before her and explains, "I wanted to see the depth of your desperation, my lady." Looking at her with his sharp yellow eyes behind his glasses, Mikhail says, "Those who risk coming to see me are desperate enough to pay a matching price." Blair replies with absolute confidence, "It only shows you are confident you can get the job done cleanly." Mikhail sits across from her and asks, "Now would you tell me the details of your request? The more specific, the better." Raising 3 fingers, Blair states, "I have 3 requests." Describing her first request, Blair says, "First, secure a small villa near Argenta, the capital of the Kingdom of Clania, as she imagines a future of peace and freedom." Mikhail watches her intently, wondering to himself, does that mean she plans to leave the duchy? Blair presents her second request. "Second, I need men to be involved in a scandal with me, about 4 or 5, as she visualizes her next strategic move on a chessboard. Mikhail smiles and asks, "That way I can personally report the progress to you. Would that be acceptable?" To which Blair nods and replies, "If you don't mind, I would prefer it." Blair stares at him, surprised by how easily he grasped her intentions. Blair thinks, "You already figured out my plan from just that?" before telling him, "You are quick to understand, as expected of an expert. It makes things easy. I want it to happen in 6 months." Mikhail rests his chin in his hand, agreeing, "We must begin preparations immediately then." Blair reaches into her dark cloak with a soft rustle, pulling out a folded piece of paper. Placing the paper on the table, she states her third request. "I need you to find the person who possesses a dagger with this crest." Mikhail picks up the paper, looking at it with keen interest. With a polite bow, Mikhail assures her, "Understood. I will do my best to bring you the answers you seek as soon as possible." Mikhail escorts Blair down the stairs as the tavern patrons watch them walk by in hushed silence. Mikhail watches from the doorway as Blair leaves the guild tavern and steps out into the snowy night. The guild member who wore the plague doctor mask walks up to Mikhail, noting, "You seem to be in a good mood." Mikhail smiles to himself, deeply intrigued by the Duchess's boldness. Remembering the way she held up her fingers, Mikhail thinks, "That gesture, as if she were treating me like a child." Mikhail stands by the window with a black crow perched on his shoulder, smiling with a playful and mysterious expression as he holds his mask. A mysterious cloaked figure watches from the street corner as Blair's carriage drives away under the moonlight. Back at the Duke's estate, Herdine's aide enters his dark study, calling out, "Your Grace." The aide stands respectfully before Herdine's desk as the Duke sits in deep thought, holding a pen. Herdine looks up with a cold, piercing gaze, asking, "What are you talking about all of a sudden?" The aide reports, "He saw Madame and her maid sneaking out about an hour ago. He followed them and said they entered Guild Street," leaving Herdine to wonder, "At this hour?" The aide adds, "Yes, they just returned to the estate," as Blair's maid helps her change out of her heavy cloak back in her bedchamber. Herdine ponders the news while smoking a cigar, thinking, "Who knew my seemingly gentle wife had a taste for sneaking out? She certainly caught me off guard." Looking up at the Duke, the aide asks with confusion, "Why would you?" The aide expresses his concerns. She might be plotting something with the imperial family, perhaps even a plan to absorb Delmark. Herdine coldly replies, "The emperor has plenty of other people at his disposal." That's true. Taking another drag from his cigar, Herdine confidently thinks, "The emperor still needs my power." Herdine looks at his aide with absolute coldness, stating, "I'd like to know that myself." Resting peacefully in her bed, Blair is watched over from afar as Herdine wonders what she is plotting in that little head of hers. Looking back at his desk, Herdine reminds himself that forcing them would only cause a scene, and if Blair finds out, she will just hide her plans deeper, leaving him in tense silence. Herdine aggressively crushes his cigar into the wooden ashtray, coldly instructing his aide, "For now, just guard her, keep out of sight." Back in her sunny chambers, Blair stands near her vanity as her maid busily prepares the tea table for an upcoming visitor. A woman dressed in an elegant dark brown gown and feather-trimmed hat steps into the room, bowing respectfully as she greets Blair. "It is a pleasure to meet you." Smiling warmly with a gloved hand over her chest, she introduces herself. "I belong to a vassal family of the Delmark Duchy. I am Agnes Loreline, a hypnotist." Agnes bows deeply, promising Blair, "I will do my best to help you recover your memories, my lady." As the maid pours red tea into delicate porcelain cups, Agnes explains her gentle approach. "I won't rush to force your memories out. We will start by getting you used to those past memories." Sitting across from Blair, Agnes notes softly, "You lost your memories due to severe trauma." Under the shadow of her traumatic childhood memory of being locked inside a dark wooden wardrobe, Blair looks down and questions, "What do you mean by getting used to them?" Agnes suggests their plan over tea and sweets. "First, we will have tea once a week, just like today. Could you tell me about your childhood, my lady?" Smiling gently, Agnes reassures her, "Any story is fine." Close up on Blair's trembling, beautiful blue eyes as she feels a sudden rush of anxiety. Blair's mind races with dark possibilities as she thinks, if I can't end this contract marriage before I get pregnant, Herdine will inevitably find out about the child. Besides, my body aches every time I try to force my memories back. I can't risk doing that while pregnant. Blair recalls a vision of her younger self lying sweat-soaked and feverish in bed, struggling through a nightmare. Her hands begin to tremble noticeably as she holds her teacup, causing the liquid to ripple. Noticing the distress, Agnes looks at Blair with a silent expression of concern. Agnes gently tells Blair, "Please don't be too anxious. I will make sure to recover your memories, my lady." Agnes leans across the table and warmly takes Blair's hands in hers to comfort her. A close-up of Agnes gently enveloping Blair's small, trembling hands to reassure her. Holding up her teacup, Agnes reflects, "By listening to your story, I will get to learn about another life." Looking out at a majestic snowy church, Agnes cheerfully notes, "Come to think of it, today is already the last day of the year. It feels like the new year just started." To which Blair's chibi icon nods in agreement. Yes, time really flies. Returning to their conversation, Agnes suggests, "It might be hard to think of a topic out of nowhere. So shall we talk about your childhood memories of the New Year's festival?" Leaving Blair to repeat, "The New Year's festival?" Agnes prompts her, "Do you remember anything that happened during that festival? Even the smallest detail is fine," as Blair touches her chin in deep thought. A flashback begins. Young Blair stands patiently in a beautiful room as two maids carefully brush her long wavy hair and dress her in a dark red dress. Young Blair walks down a lavishly decorated corridor as a narration box explains, "For some reason, Her Majesty had been too busy to see me lately." Feeling hopeful, young Blair smiles brightly with anticipation. Running eagerly toward a massive door, she pushes it open with a light patter of footsteps. Inside, a beautiful woman with a long dark braid stands beside a quiet young boy, smiling warmly as she greets her. "Oh, you're just in time, Blair." Young Blair's eyes widen in awe and curiosity as she stares at the mysterious guests. Sitting at an outdoor tea table, the Empress explains to young Blair, "He's now the young head of the Delmark family." Glancing back at the boy, the Empress speaks with a hint of sadness. "He is a very lonely child."
Turning back to the Empress, Blair reassures her, "Don't worry, Your Majesty."
With a bright, cheerful grin, young Blair promises, "I'm sure to become his friend when we meet." The Empress gently places a hand on the young boy's shoulder and instructs him, "Greet her, Herdine. She is Her Highness, the Princess." Young Herdine gracefully kneels on one knee to kiss the princess's hand. While Blair is mesmerized by how elegant his movements are, a chilling close-up of Herdine's cold, piercing gaze leaves her suddenly startled and shivering. Sweating nervously, young Blair stammeringly replies, "It's nice to meet you, Lord Delmark," as the Empress happily watches them, saying, "I've been hoping the two of you would meet." Two children stand in awkward silence, looking away from one another. Clasping her hands together with excitement, young Blair enthusiastically agrees, "Yes, I'd love to." The maids pull out chairs as the Empress suggests, "Then let's play together, the three of us. Please, both of you, take a seat." Young Blair clings tightly to the Empress's dress, peering out with clear apprehension at the silent, shadow-veiled boy standing before her. A dark panel depicts young Herdine walking away into a beam of light. Narration boxes read, "The fall of a once-envied family was sweet gossip for nobles who feast on the misfortunes of others." A mystical illustration shows a white-winged wolf beast bestowing celestial power upon a kneeling knight. Narration box, "The origin of Delmark." In a chaotic, blood-splattered battle scene, a formidable knight stands triumphant over a fallen victim. Narration boxes state the power they possessed and even the price they paid and how it all ended. Terrified by his dark aura, young Blair clutches herself and thinks in fear he's scary, as Herdine glances back at her coldly. The two children sit opposite each other at the round table, preparing to play a card game. Young Herdine studies his hand of cards, murmuring, He reaches out with a steady hand to pick a card from young Blair's hand, his blue-red heterochromatic eyes focused intently. Grand emblems of a crowned, winged shield shine over a map of the Empire, with a narration box describing a national hero who saved the Empire in the final Magic War. A legendary figure reaches up toward the majestic white-winged wolf beast in a glowing sanctuary. A text box details the ultimate reward. In return, he received a powerful body capable of using both aura and magic. A dramatic battle scene showcases a legendary knight wielding a glowing sword. Narration boxes explain, normally humans can only use one of these powers, but the first Duke of Delmark wielded both to win the war. Using aura and magic together is like mixing fire and oil. Wielded well, they create synergy, but one mistake can trigger a rampage. The power granted to the first head of the family was passed down. Herdine's father, the predecessor, was one of those descendants. The commoners whisper in shock and distress, their faces filled with worry. Everyone in the Empire feared and admired him. A pale, lifeless hand covered in blood lies on the forest ground among scattered white petals. During a family trip to the forest, his mother was found attacked by monsters. Upon discovering this, the predecessor went on a rampage, brutally slaughtering every monster in the forest. Young Herdine stands frozen in utter shock, blood splattered across his face and clothes. To protect his son from his own rampage, he took his own life. The fall of the Delmark Duchy, once revered by all, their tragedy spread far and wide, fed on by those who gossip for amusement. Young Blair cautiously peers over her playing card, watching Herdine's movements. They whispered that Herdine, who inherited the same power, might also rampage one day. Young Herdine holds his cards, telling her, "Princess, it's your turn," as they play a game at the table. Sweat dripping down her face, young Blair concentrates deeply on her cards, trying to decide her next move. The two children lock eyes in a quiet moment of tension during the card game. Young Herdine stares back coldly, causing young Blair to startle slightly. A close-up of the matching Ace of Hearts cards as the game comes to an end. Blair stands up with a bright smile, saying, "Now that it's over, I shall take my leave." Feeling pleased, young Blair walks away with a happy expression while Herdine and the Empress watch her go. Herdine calmly tells her, "I understand how you feel, but you don't need to force yourself to attend tomorrow." Stopping near the doorway, young Blair looks back at Herdine with confusion, answering, "I am." The heavy door shuts with a quiet click as Blair leaves the room. The Empress turns to young Blair and gently asks, "Blair, what did you think of Herdine? Do you think you two can be friends?" Fidgeting nervously, young Blair replies, "He's quiet, so it's hard to tell, but he seems like a good person." The Empress gives her a knowing look and points out, "Lying is a bad habit, Blair." Caught in her lie, young Blair looks incredibly flustered and breaks into a nervous sweat. The Empress giggles softly at the young princess's adorable reaction as Blair blushes. Putting her hand over her heart, young Blair earnestly clarifies, "I mean it," while the Empress watches her with affection. Young Blair steps forward and reaches out to hold the Empress's hand. The Empress pulls young Blair close into a warm, protective embrace, comforting her. The Empress gently caresses Blair's hair to soothe her worries. Pressing a gentle kiss onto young Blair's forehead, the Empress fills her with a sense of peace. Young Blair beams with a radiant, happy smile, feeling deeply loved. She looks down softly, holding on to the warm feeling of safety. Clinging to the Empress, young Blair thinks with a touch of sadness, "Has never said anything like that to me." The next day, the New Year's festival began with the dawn of the new year. In the morning, the imperial family and other houses hunted offerings in the winter forest. In the afternoon, we held worship at the temple, and in the evening, a banquet was held at the imperial palace. Nobles gather at the grand palace steps, preparing to bow before the imperial family seated on high thrones. Blair recalls the event, noting, "Ivan and I didn't attend the New Year's festival banquet until evening." Seated next to Prince Ivan, young Blair looks up in surprise as a murmur ripples through the banquet hall. The crowd of nobles begins to whisper as young Herden walks into the ballroom. Walking forward with a solemn expression, young Herden draws attention as nobles gossip. "I know, I was surprised he even attended the morning hunt and the temple worship." Whisperings echo through the crowd, saying he must restore his family's honor and support Her Majesty the Empress, though they add, "It won't be easy though." Kneeling gracefully before the throne, young Herden is greeted with the words, "Please watch over the empire with your grace this year as well." Standing before the emperor and nobles as the head of the family, Herden was still young. The empress looks down at young Herden with a sorrowful and gentle expression. Despite his heavy burdens, young Herden stands tall and composed. As the narration box notes, youth only made him shine brighter. Seeing him calmly carry out his duties as the head of the family only made him look incredibly fragile to me, young Blair reflects with deep sadness in her eyes. In the present day, Agnes sits across from Blair over tea and asks, "So the late Empress arranged your first meeting?" Smiling warmly, Agnes raises her teacup and asks, "Is it?" Smiling warmly, Agnes lifts her hand to her cheek and says with delight, "Of course! It's the kind of story every girl dreams of." Blair blinks in surprise as she looks at Agnes, her purple eyes wide. Agnes gazes at her with a gentle, understanding smile, softly addressing her, "Madam." Blair looks back with a quiet, reflective expression, her long eyelashes framing her deep blue-purple eyes. Smiling serenely, Agnes clasps her hands together in her lap and waits for Blair's response. Blair gazes off into space, a soft, melancholy smile gracing her lips as she prepares to continue her tale. Sitting alone at the elegant table, Blair lets out a soft sigh, her mind drifting deep into the memories of the past. The grand banquet hall is filled with glittering chandeliers and elegantly dressed nobles whispering behind their fans. Young Blair stands close to her mother amid the crowd of nobles, her youthful eyes looking around the grand hall. As young Herden walks solemnly through the banquet, whispering nobles murmur in the background, "My goodness, how tragic! It's a miracle he's even here." Looking at his cold, stoic profile, others continue to whisper, "It's impressive, but on the other hand, he's so young, yet so hardened." Unfortunately, Her Majesty had left early that day because she wasn't feeling well, young Blair recalls with sadness, standing next to a shadow-covered maid. And there was no one on Herden's side in the banquet hall. Warning whispers echo through the room, advising everyone, "Don't go near him." As young Herden walks away with his head lowered, the nobles completely ignore him, gossiping amongst themselves, "Oh, by the way, did you hear about Count Burming? Oh, what happened?" Alone in the freezing palace garden, young Herden suddenly clutches his chest and lets out a pained cough, struggling to catch his breath. Doubled over and leaning against a snow-covered tree, he continues to cough violently as young Blair watches him from a distance with deep worry. Cautiously stepping forward, young Blair reaches out to him, asking in a trembling voice, "Are you all?" Startled and defensive, young Herden violently shoves her away, shouting, "Get lost!" while young Blair cries out in surprise as she falls to the ground. Knocked down onto the cold snow, young Blair blinks in utter bewilderment and shock at his sudden outburst. Realizing what he has done, young Herden flinches and stares back at her with wide, startled eyes. Seeing how sick and weak he looks, young Blair crawls closer and gently explains, "I just wanted to pat your back." Trembling with a mixture of fear and rage, young Herden glares at her coldly and threatens, "Get lost if you don't want to die." Recalling the Empress's words as she comforted her, young Blair remembers, he has so many emotional scars, so he doesn't know how to treat people. Staring at his harsh expression, young Blair is frozen in place, a drop of sweat rolling down her cheek as she tries to comprehend his pain. Behind his harsh words, his blue eyes looked so terribly lonely, young Blair realizes, looking at his isolated figure. As Herden turns to leave, young Blair urgently calls out, "Don't go," causing him to halt in surprise. She runs off with determination, turning back to shout over her shoulder, "Wait here for just a moment." Young Herden is left standing alone in the snow, watching her run away with a bewildered and guarded expression. True to her word, the light patter of footsteps echoes as young Blair returns, while Herden remains waiting silently in the garden. Panting heavily in the cold winter air, she eagerly makes her way back to where she left him. Spotting his dark figure resting on a stone bench, she smiles with relief and pants, "Found you." Looking up at her in disbelief, young Hurden asks quietly, "Why did you come back?" Without a word, she steps forward and gently presses a soft white fur hand muff into his gloved hands. Young Hurden stares blankly at the warm hand muff in his hands, completely confused by her unexpected kindness. Blushing slightly, young Blair looks at him with deep sincerity, hoping he will accept her small gesture of warmth. Smiling warmly, young Blair softly encourages him. They're warm and super soft, too. Looking down at the fluffy hand muff, young Hurden's cheeks flush bright pink as a wave of unfamiliar warmth washes over him. Suddenly, a voice echoes through the garden. "Princess, are you here?" causing young Blair to gasp in surprise. Knowing she has to go, she quickly walks away, turning back to tell him, "Don't worry, everyone will only remember you looking wonderful." She holds a finger to her lips with a playful, secret smile, signaling him to keep their meeting a secret. Young Hurden is left behind once more, his eyes transfixed on her retreating figure as the snow gently falls around them. Back inside the palace, her worried maid quickly wipes her brow, scolding her, "You shouldn't just disappear like that. I was so worried." Young Blair apologizes, silently praying, "Please let Mother love me." Looking at her mother, who always seems distant, she continues her silent prayer, "Please let Mother and Her Majesty the Empress get along." And, gazing back towards the winter garden where Hurden sits holding the hand muff, she completes her heartfelt prayer, "Please let the Duke of Delmark be happy." In the present, Agnes smiles tenderly across the tea table and remarks softly, "You must love him very much." Perhaps, just as Agnes said, I was drawn to him ever since that New Year's festival, Blair reflects as she walks down the lavishly decorated corridor. She looks down with a wistful expression, her heart still carrying the weight of those childhood feelings. Yes, ever since those days, Blair quietly admits, the tea session wrapping up as both women sit in comfortable silence. Agnes watches her with a look of deep affection and quiet support, pleased to see how cherished those memories are. Gazing out, Blair thinks to herself with a hint of resignation, "Even so, it's a new year I've already lived through. There's nothing new about it." She proceeds silently, her calculated steps reflecting her attempt to analyze the chaotic variables of this timeline and determine how to minimize future suffering. Her mind searches for past data, questioning how the events of this year's New Year's festival can be steered to produce the safest, most beneficial outcome. Every decision in a delicate timeline carries immense consequences. She stands quietly, evaluating which actions will maximize safety and prevent needless tragedy. As she realizes the high-stakes anxiety grips her, she understands that a single miscalculation could lead to widespread disaster, shifting the balance of the future toward pain rather than peace. He stands in silence, an unpredictable factor in her calculations whose cooperation is crucial to achieving a high-utility, harm-reducing outcome. She directly asks him, "What brings you here at this hour?" seeking to understand if his presence can be leveraged to prevent the upcoming crisis. She delivers a critical warning to prevent a massive loss of life. Demonic beasts will appear at the New Year's festival hunting grounds tomorrow. He observes her closely, weighing the credibility of her warning to determine if mobilizing resources based on her words is a rational, risk-mitigating choice. Recognizing that only the absolute truth can convince him to act, she reveals her secret to secure his cooperation. "I can see the future." Left alone, she nervously calculates the risks of her actions, wondering if altering the past will ultimately lead to a net increase or decrease in overall well-being. She recalls how her absence due to a cold in the original timeline resulted in injuries but 0 casualties, a moderately successful outcome that she now hopes to improve upon. She remembers that while the Duke was unharmed, the event was physically and emotionally demanding, leaving him covered in blood, a source of trauma she wishes to prevent. She debates her next move. What should I do? If things go exactly as they did in the past, it should end without issue, but her anxiety deepens as she performs a risk assessment. What if my interference in the past changes the outcome? What if trying to stop it only makes things worse? She considers the practical challenge of her strategy. Above all, how do I explain how I know this? Unless I reveal my regression? She feels suspended in the complex gears of time, carrying the heavy burden of foresight as she strives to guide everyone toward a safer, happier path. She continues her intense mental calculations, searching for a path that minimizes the Duke's burden while ensuring the absolute safety of everyone at the festival. Letting out a quiet sigh, she endeavors to clear her mind of fear so she can approach the upcoming crisis with pure, objective logic. She stands before him once more, reinforcing her claim to ensure he acts on the information. "I can see the future." He remains highly skeptical, analyzing her expression to evaluate whether dedicating energy to her warnings is a sound, rational decision. He demands, "And you expect me to believe that?" While she pleads, "I know it sounds absurd, but please believe me, there is no harm in being prepared." She reminds herself of past successful outcomes to bolster her confidence, recalling, "He believed me when it came to Lena." Relying on their history of mutual benefit, she reasons, "If it's Herdine who protected me without questioning anything, maybe he will believe me this time too." He looks at her with a shadowed gaze, signaling a shift in his analysis as he replies, "I see." To test the predictive utility of her foresight before committing his resources, he pulls her close and demands, "Then tell me what I am about to do next." He challenges her, testing if her knowledge is practical and precise. Is it too difficult? It should be simple enough. She pushes him away, shivering at his dangerous skepticism when the safety of so many lives hangs in the balance. They part ways, each left to independently process the conversation and prepare for the impending threat with the limited information at hand. He drinks in silence, carefully calculating the credibility of her warning and the potential consequences of preparing for an unverified danger. The day of the New Year's festival arrives at the Imperial hunting grounds, marking the critical window where they must prevent the predicted catastrophe. She holds on to her resolve, knowing that preventing the appearance of the demonic beasts is essential to preserving the lives and stability of the Empire. He rides into the snow-covered forest, prepared to act as a shield to protect the hunting party and minimize any potential harm. Wrapped in a heavy cloak, she joins the hunt, determined to monitor the situation firsthand to ensure her intervention yields the best possible outcome. He maintains high situational awareness, listening closely to his companion to ensure they can respond to any sudden threats with maximum efficiency. Though she is weak and coughing, she pushes through the physical discomfort, prioritizing the safety of the collective over her own personal well-being. His companion spots a target, calling out, "Grace, there is a white sable over there," identifying an immediate opportunity to secure a valuable resource. He draws his bow with practiced ease, aiming to secure the prey swiftly and efficiently to avoid unnecessary struggle or wasted energy. The arrow is released and strikes the sable instantly, terminating its life quickly to minimize any prolonged suffering. The onlookers cheer, "Oh, as expected," as the successful demonstration of skill boosts group morale and reinforces social cohesion. He approaches the fallen sable to retrieve the harvest, ensuring that the energy expended during the hunt yields a tangible reward. Upon closer inspection, he discovers a tiny, whimpering baby. It had a kit, introducing an unexpected variable that requires a decision regarding the value of a dependent life. He draws his dagger, preparing to make a pragmatic decision to resolve the kit's fate in what he perceives as the most efficient manner. Concerned by his sudden action, she calls out in alarm, "What are you doing?" questioning the necessity of ending a young life. He explains his reasoning. Without its mother, it will soon fall prey to predators. It would be better for it to die with its mother now. He believes quick euthanasia minimizes overall suffering. The helpless kit whimpers in the hollow, its survival hanging on whether they prioritize a painless end or the potential for future life. Shouting no, she leaps from her horse and rushes forward, determined to prevent what she views as an unnecessary loss of life and potential happiness. Grabbing his arm, she stops his blade and argues, "What do you think you are doing? It might still survive." She insists that even a small chance of survival is worth pursuing. She pleads earnestly, "Even if it is destined to die soon, you cannot call this mercy. It is better to live even one more day." She argues that experiencing life holds inherent value. He counters, "Do you think it would still feel that way while being eaten alive by wolves?" To which she immediately proposes a highly beneficial solution. "I will raise it." He looks at her in surprise, realizing that her commitment to personally raise the kit eliminates the threat of predators, maximizing the creature's chances of a safe, happy life. He responds coldly, walking past her as he remarks, "I doubt it would want to be taken in by the one who stood by during its mother's death." She looks after him with a pained, sorrowful expression, but as she gently reaches her hand out to touch the tree, she quietly murmurs to herself, "Even so." A tragic contrast unfolds, showing a mother lying lifeless on the ground in a pool of blood, while below, a young child sleeps peacefully in a crib surrounded by a soft, glowing light.